The spring rain fell in a steady drizzle, pattering against the world like tiny spirits dancing between heaven and earth. In the countryside, they say spring rain is as precious as oil, a sign of a coming harvest and a reason to smile. But here, in the heart of the Ming Empire, there was no joy. The raindrops hit the glazed tiles of the Minghuang Temple and funneled silently into bronze pipes, disappearing into the stone drains. This was the Forbidden City in Nanjing, the most powerful and glorious place in human civilization. Yet today, it was draped in white. To us, white represents purity, but it also represents death. Everywhere I looked, the palace was a sea of mourning clothes. The heavy sound of sobbing echoed through the halls. The crown prince, the first in line for the throne and the eldest son of Emperor Hongwu, had died this morning. In this era of strict Confucian tradition, his birthright meant he was the only true successor. Inside a quiet room in the East Palace, I stared into a bronze mirror. The face looking back was familiar, yet hauntingly strange. It was a thin, frail body. I reached out a pale finger, trembling, and touched my cheek. I pulled back instantly, as if I'd been burned. Then, a spark of life flickered in the boy's timid eyes. I grinned. I wasn't dead. My name was Zhang Hao. My last memory was a horrific car crash and the panicked faces of doctors trying to save me. Somehow, my soul had traveled hundreds of years back in time, landing in the body of a boy who had fainted from grief over his father's death. The boy's name, my name now, was Zhu Yunting. Memories flooded my mind, merging my past life with this new reality. This was the most prestigious name in the Ming Empire. My father was the crown prince who had just passed away. My grandfather was the legendary Emperor Hongwu, Zhu Yuandong. My mother was the daughter of the founding hero Chang Yechen. I was a grandson, a legitimate son of the first wife. In this world, that one word meant everything. It meant legitimacy. It meant the right to rule. My older brother, Zhu Xiangying, had been the original heir, but he was sickly and died young. My mother gave her life to bring me into this world to ensure the bloodline continued, dying shortly after I was born. With my brother and mother gone, I was the only legitimate grandson left. I looked at my reflection and felt a surge of satisfaction. This was a hell of a starting position. But then, my smile froze. I realized the problem. I was Zhu Yunting, not Zhu Yunwen. History told a very different story about what happened next. In a few years, when my grandfather passed away, it wouldn't be me sitting on the dragon throne. It would be my second brother, Zhu Yunwen. Zhu Yunwen was the son of a concubine, a Shu son. After my mother died, his mother used her charms to get promoted to the position of primary consort. Because he was a year older than me, he became the eldest son in name, even if the court still saw him as secondary to my bloodline. I knew the future. Zhu Yunwen would become the Jiangwen emperor, and I knew that both he and the man who would eventually overthrow him, the Yongle emperor, would never trust me. My bloodline was too pure, my claim too legal. In the original timeline, my grandfather would name me the Prince of Wu, a title he held himself before becoming emperor. It showed how much he loved me. But I would never be allowed to leave the palace. I would be kept under house arrest, a golden bird in a cage, until I was eventually imprisoned for life. I frowned at the mirror. Why? Why would a genius like Zhu Yuanzhang choose a Shu grandson over a D grandson? The answer lay in the memories of the original Zhu Yunting. This kid was a disaster. He was weak, hated studying, and because he grew up without a mother, he was timid and indecisive. He couldn't even speak clearly when he was nervous. Yet, in private, he was spoiled, arrogant, and mean-spirited. He was a worthless adu who couldn't be propped up. And my grandfather? He was no ordinary man. Zhu Yuanzhang was a titan of history. He started with nothing, literally a starving peasant, and fought his way up to drive out the Mongols and found a 300-year dynasty. Some called him a tyrant because he hated corruption. He'd skin a man alive for stealing 50 taels of silver. He purged the founding officials to secure the throne for his family. But he was a man of the people. Even as emperor, he saw himself as a peasant who suffered. He wore coarse clothes, and my memory of him was always the same. A powerful man in a simple robe with sleeves worn white and frayed at the edges. He expected his family to be just as disciplined. He wanted an heir who was strong, wise, and capable. The old Zhu Yunting was none of those things. But I wasn't him anymore. I had a second chance, and I wasn't going to spend it rotting in a prison cell. For an emperor like my grandfather, his descendants could be anything. They could be wolves, tigers, or leopards. They could be generals leading armies across the vast desert to crush the Mongols. They could be brilliant strategists ruling from the imperial court. But they could never be cowards. They could never be weaklings who couldn't even speak a sentence without stuttering. I searched the memories of the original Zhu Yunting. Every time he met the old emperor, my grandfather's eyes were filled with a heartbreaking sense of regret. In this era, a hero father was expected to raise a hero son. A tiger doesn't give birth to a dog. The answer to why I lost the throne was staring me in the face. Why would a man like Zhu Yuanzhang give his empire to a grandson with a broken character? Even if I was the legitimate grandson, the bloodline mattered, but the empire mattered more. So, the throne went to my cousin, Zhu Yunwen. I was given the title of Prince of Wu, the wealthiest title, the most legitimate rank, but I was sidelined. I looked at my reflection and smirked. You really can't blame anyone else, I whispered. You were useless. Why would your grandfather trust you with the world? Slowly my smile faded. A sharp, cold light flickered in my eyes. I was here now. I was the most prestigious grandson of the Ming dynasty, and I wasn't going to let that throne slip through my fingers. I wanted that seat. Not for anyone else, but for myself. In my past life as Zhang Hao, I knew history. I knew how miserable this kid's life was supposed to be. His cousin, the new emperor, would be too afraid to even let him leave for his own fiefdom. Then his uncle, Zhu Di, would seize power and lock him away forever out of fear of his legitimate claim to the throne. In that timeline, Zhu Yunting died in misery at 39 years old. His descendants were even wiped from the imperial family records. I wouldn't let that tragedy happen to me. I wanted the throne, and I wanted to build a Ming dynasty that the world would never forget. I grinned at the mirror again, my gaze brimming with confidence. From this day forward, I was Zhu Yunting. There was no turning back. If I retreated now, the only thing waiting for me was a dark, lifelong prison cell. Compared to a prince, my past life was as ordinary as it gets. I was just a kid from a normal family. I went to school, joined the army, and after I was discharged, I became a rideshare driver just to survive. I worked from dawn till dusk, living a quiet, honest life. The world had ground down my sharp edges and buried my ambitions. But this soul, the soul of a common man, had something the original prince lacked. I had grit. I didn't know how to compromise. I had a hunger that only someone who started with nothing could understand. I didn't have a powerful father or influential relatives to back me up. I only had my own two hands and my own two fists. Everything I ever got, I earned. I knew how to read people, how to endure hardship, and how to be ruthless when necessary. A poor kid isn't easily broken. I took one last look at my face and gave a firm nod. Come in, I called out. The sound of footsteps tapped against the floor. The doors behind me creaked open, and several eunuchs dressed in white robes knelt before me. Their movements were cautious, their faces filled with humble flattery. Third Master, your servants are here to help you dress, one said. His accent was strange. Most of the eunuchs in the palace weren't Han Chinese, they were from Goryeo. That small northern kingdom had been a vassal state for ages. When the Ming dynasty was founded, the Goryeo generals saw our invincible cavalry and decided it was better to kill their own king and beg us for a title than to fight us. They were poor, so they sent the only things they had of value, beautiful women and eunuchs. The man speaking to me was named Wang Bachi. In the future, the Ming dynasty would be plagued by powerful, corrupt eunuchs, but right now, under my grandfather's rule, they were kept on a very short leash. He hated them. He didn't even let them learn to read. The eunuchs began dressing me in white mourning clothes. Having people wait on me hand and foot felt wrong to my modern soul. I'll do it myself, I said, reaching for my shoes. The eunuchs froze. They immediately started banging their heads against the floor. We deserve death. We haven't served the third master well enough. I ignored their trembling and pulled on the white hemp shoes. I was the third son of the late crown prince, and since I hadn't been formally granted a title yet, they called me Third Master. Wang Bachi, I whispered. Are the others at the morning hall yet? Wang Bachi was sharp. He knew I was asking about my stepmother, Lady Liu, and my elder brother, Zhu Yunwen. He glanced around nervously. It's still early, Master. He leaned in and quickly pressed something into my hand. Master, I noticed your eyes don't look right. I looked down. It was a piece of ginger. I understood instantly. My eyes weren't red or swollen. I hadn't been crying. In this era of strict Confucian ritual, if a close relative died and you didn't look like your world had ended, people would tear you apart for being heartless. Good thinking, I said, patting him on the shoulder. The Goryeo eunuch nearly burst into tears. The old Zhu Yunting only ever used these servants as punching bags. He had never been treated with kindness. Outside, the spring rain was still falling, drizzling onto the stone courtyard and forming tiny streams between the cracks. I adjusted my white mourning robes and walked slowly toward the great Feng'an Hall. As the legitimate son, I had to offer sacrifices at my father's coffin. I had to keep watch. As I approached, I could already hear the wailing from inside. Oh, Crown Prince, why didn't you take me with you? I stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking into my shoes. Suddenly, a heart-wrenching scream tore through the air from the side room. It was a woman's voice, raw and desperate, crying out for my father. A crowd of eunuchs and maids emerged, surrounding a woman in white mourning clothes. She was sobbing so hard she could barely stand, leaning heavily on her attendants for support. This was Lady Liu, my stepmother and the successor consort. Walking behind her was a teenage boy whose face looked a lot like mine. His eyes were red and swollen, and he was leading two younger boys by the hand. That was my second brother, Zhu Yunwen, along with his full brothers, Zhu Yunjian and Zhu Yunxi. They moved as a group, a wall of grief and wailing, heading toward the main hall. I stood there alone in the rain. I took the ginger Wang Bachi had given me and rubbed it hard against my eyes. The sting was instant and brutal. My eyes burned, turning bright red as tears and salt poured down my face. I looked like a man destroyed by sorrow. Mother, I said, bowing as they approached. Lady Liu didn't even glance at me. She walked right past, her cries never faltering, acting as if I didn't exist. I felt a cold smile form in my mind. She couldn't even be bothered to keep up appearances. But Zhu Yunwen stopped. He looked at me, his face a mask of concern. Third brother, he said, his voice soft. I heard you fainted this morning. Are you all right? He looked every bit the caring older brother. I bowed deeply, keeping my face hidden. With you looking out for me, I am fine. It's just, Father's passing, my heart is in pieces. I used my sleeve to cover my eyes and started sobbing. My display triggered him and the younger boys, and soon we were all crying together in the rain. Eunuchs rushed over to hold umbrellas for us. Yunwen led the way with the little ones, and I followed half a step behind. As we walked, I heard the high-pitched cry of a young girl. I turned and saw two small children, 5 or 6 years old, trip and fall into the muddy puddles. They were my half-sisters, Ninger and Xiaoer. Their story was just like mine. They had lost their mother years ago, and now their father was gone too. Their mother had been a maid serving Lady Liu, a woman who died mysteriously shortly after they were born. I looked at Lady Liu's retreating back and felt a chill. This palace was the most dangerous place on earth. No one here was simple. I didn't wait for the servants. I ran to the girls and picked them up myself. Don't cry, I whispered, wiping the mud from their faces. Does it hurt? Their big, round eyes were full of tears. They looked at me, their brother who usually ignored them, and nodded slowly. Come here. I'll carry you. I tucked them into my arms. Little Xiaoer buried her face in my neck, while Ninger whispered in my ear. Third brother, will we never see Daddy again? My heart actually ached. The memories in my head told me that Zhu Biao had been a good father. Even in his final days, he had struggled to see his children one last time. I tightened my grip on them. Don't be afraid, I said. You have me now. We approached the great Feng'an Hall. The wind grew stronger, whipping the rain against the white mourning banners. Guards stood like stone statues along the walls. Dozens of officials were already there, kneeling in the mud and howling in grief. The world was a blur of white robes and gray rain. When I appeared carrying the two little girls, the officials' cries grew even louder. Some of them even started banging their heads against the stone floor. I saw Lady Liu and Zhu Yunwen turn their heads to look back at us. They knew exactly what this meant. I was the legitimate son. My father's first wife, the one who died, was my mother. According to the laws my grandfather wrote, the throne belonged to the legitimate line. Even if I was younger, my status as a D son outweighed Yunwen's status as a Shu son born of a consort. In the eyes of these officials, I was the one who truly mattered. I kept the tears flowing, nodding to the officials as I passed, acknowledging their loyalty with my eyes. Just as I reached the entrance of the hall, 3 men walked out to meet us. They looked exhausted, their faces gaunt, but they moved with the power of seasoned warriors. Second uncle, I blurted out. Third uncle, great uncle. The words felt natural, though they were far too casual for a palace. The 3 men froze. The 2 younger ones were Chang Sheng and Chang San, the sons of the legendary General Chang Yechen. The older man, the one with eyes like daggers and a frame that leaked raw power, was General Lan Yu. He was my mother's uncle. These 3 were my blood. They were the only family I had left who actually cared if I lived or died. Seeing them, I felt the residual emotions of the original Zhu Yunting flood my chest. Their eyes turned red the moment I spoke. To them, seeing me was like seeing their dead sister again. I heard you fainted this morning, my second uncle, Chang Sheng, said, his voice trembling. Are you better? You have to take care of yourself. You're all your mother has left in this world. The doctors saw me. I replied, my voice breaking. I was just too sad. I'm okay now. The servants and guards stayed back, giving us a moment of privacy. These 2 men, who had spent their lives killing on battlefields, were now shaking. They looked at me, the boy who carried their family's blood, and I knew right then, I wasn't alone. You must take care of yourself, my second uncle whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I looked at them, my vision blurred by tears. I held the 2 little girls close and gave a bitter, hollow laugh. My life is hard, uncle. My mother is gone. Now my father is gone too. Who is left to love a child with no parents? The words hit them like a physical blow. Lan Yu stepped forward, his eyes bloodshot and fierce. He straightened his back, his expression turning solemn. What nonsense are you talking about? He growled. Your mother was my niece. Even if your parents are gone, you still have your uncles. You still have me. We will love you. We will watch over you. We will help you. He glanced around the courtyard, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. If any blind fool dares to give you trouble, they'll have to answer to us first. After he spoke, he turned that cold, murderous stare toward the interior of Feng'an Hall. He was looking directly at the spot where Lady Liu and Zhu Yunwen were seated. I watched him and felt a chill. It was no wonder history recorded this man being executed by my grandfather, Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang, despite his legendary achievements. This was the imperial palace. Whether people were listening or not, a subject simply couldn't say such things. To a minor official, it was arrogance. To the emperor, it was a blatant lack of respect for the throne. Even though Lan Yu's words were filled with genuine love for me, his attitude was far too reckless. He acted as if he were untouchable. Just then, 2 more elderly men approached with hurried, rhythmic steps. Despite their snow-white hair and beards, they moved with the strength of young soldiers. My mind immediately supplied their names: Feng Sheng, the Duke of Song, and Fu Yud, the Duke of Ying. These were legendary veterans who had bled for the Ming dynasty since its birth. Is your health all right, third young master? Fu Yud asked, his face etched with concern. Both men looked at me as if I were their own flesh and blood. They had watched my father, Zhu Biao, grow up. In their hearts, my father was their beloved junior, and I, his legitimate son, was the continuation of that bond. I bowed my head slightly to them. Thank you for your concern, dukes. I am well. I didn't use flowery language, but I made sure my gratitude showed in my eyes. These old soldiers were the backbone of the empire. Back in the days before the Ming dynasty was even established, my father had sat on their war horses, witnessing the conquest of the world. They had protected him as he grew into an unshakable heir. Now that he was gone, all that loyalty and love had transferred directly to me. As for Zhu Yunwen, to them, he was likely just an ordinary son of a concubine. His mother's family had no status. Compared to me, a child born of the crown princess and backed by the powerful Huaxi military faction, Zhu Yunwen wasn't even on their radar. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw more people approaching. They were all high-ranking nobles and generals from the founding Huashi group, like Chao Zhan and Zhang Yi. They were walking fast, eager to pay their respects. A sudden realization struck me. I was standing in the middle of a political lightning storm. It was one thing to share a few words with my uncles, but if all the founding generals of the Ming dynasty gathered around me right now, it would look like a conspiracy. In the deep palace, every step was like walking on thin ice. One mistake could cost me everything. I quickly excused myself, citing my grief, and carried the two girls into Feng'an Hall. "Why is the young master leaving?" Chaozhen shouted, sounding disappointed. "I haven't even bowed to him yet." "Lower your voice," Fu Yid snapped, his temperament much more stable. "Today, we all need to keep our mouths shut." Lan Yu stood in the rain, watching the mourners inside the hall. His brow furrowed. The boy lost his mother young, and now his father is gone. He's still so small. I can't imagine how many people in this palace are already planning to scheme against him. He gnashed his teeth, his voice dropping to a low growl. "The crown prince is gone, but we are still here. We owe him everything. We must protect the only bloodline he left behind." "You don't even have to say it, General," Chaozhen choked out, his voice cracking. "Back in the 18th and 20th years of Hongwu, I broke the law twice. If the crown prince hadn't protected me, my head would have been off a long time ago. I listened to the prince when he was alive. Now that he's gone, I listen to the third young master." He Rong, the Count of Dongguan, nodded solemnly. "Without the prince, I wouldn't have this title on my head. My heart follows the young master now. If the emperor decides to send the boy to a fiefdom, I'll give up this bird-brain title just to go be his gatekeeper. It's the only way to repay the prince's kindness." It was a staggering realization. In 5,000 years of history, my father, Zhu Biao, wasn't just the most secure crown prince, he was the most loved. My grandfather had a violent temper, and the men who helped him build the empire were rough, uneducated soldiers who constantly offended him. My father was always the one who stepped in, smoothed things over, and saved their lives. They fought like demons on the battlefield, but they were magnets for trouble in times of peace. Men like Hirong had even stormed the houses of high officials with knives when they got angry. If it weren't for my father pleading for mercy based on their military service, the emperor would have executed them years ago. At that moment, I knew I was important, but I hadn't yet grasped the true scale of the political inheritance my father had left me. The sound of wailing filled Feng'an Hall. As soon as I stepped inside, servants came forward to take the two little girls. I immediately became the center of attention. I could feel Lady Lu's eyes on me. She was wiping away tears, but her gaze was sharp, filled with an undeniable mix of worry and guarded suspicion. I walked past her and Zhu Yunwen. Hardly anyone acknowledged them. Even if someone did, it was with cold, perfunctory etiquette. But as I moved through the room, the founding ministers and veteran officials swarmed toward me, whispering words of comfort. I glanced back toward the entrance. Through the falling spring rain, I saw Lan Yu, my uncles, and the rest of the Huashi generals still standing there, watching me. When they saw me look back, they gave a small, subtle wave. A sudden, terrifying thought hit me. This was the 25th year of the Hongwu era. According to history, in the 26th year, just 1 year from now, General Lan Yu would be executed by my grandfather. Thousands of others would die with him. The record said over 15,000 people were purged, including almost every man standing out there in the rain. Why did my grandfather kill them all? I looked at Zhu Yunwen, who was kneeling and sobbing nearby. The answer was simple. He did it for his grandson's throne. Lan Yu and the others clearly despised Zhu Yunwen. My grandfather knew that if these arrogant, powerful warriors wouldn't serve his chosen successor, they had to be eliminated to ensure a peaceful reign. From a cold, imperial perspective, he wasn't wrong. A king cannot leave powerful threats behind for a weak heir. But it was a tragic waste. Because of this purge, when my uncle Zhu Di eventually rebelled years later, the central government had no great generals left to lead the army. The empire was forced to rely on idiots like Li Jinglong, who was crushed by Zhu Di and fled at the first sign of trouble. The ultimate irony was that Zhu Yunwen protected Li Jinglong despite his failures, only for Li Jinglong to open the city gates and surrender when the rebellion reached Nanjing. Meanwhile, The veteran families my grandfather had spent years trying to suppress were the ones who fought and died in droves to protect the throne. History showed that these rough soldiers from Huaxi were the true heroes of the era. And right now, they were the only ones standing between me and the wolves. I looked at the men standing in the rain. One of them was Lan Yu, the Duke of Liang. The man was a legend. He had crushed the Northern Yuan army at Bayer Lake, nearly capturing the Mongol emperor himself. He had seized princes, princesses, and over 1,000 high-ranking officials. He took nearly 80,000 prisoners and hundreds of thousands of livestock. His military feats were staggering, rivaling the greatest generals in Chinese history. He had single-handedly restored the pride of the Han people after centuries of weakness. Under his blade, the once mighty Northern Yuan collapsed. He had stripped away the last shred of dignity from the Golden family. As I watched him, I made a silent vow. If I were the one to take the throne, these men wouldn't have to die. They wouldn't perish in some petty internal power struggle. They deserved to shine on the battlefield, not bleed on an executioner's block. The sound of soul-wrenching sobbing from inside the Fenghan Palace snapped me back to reality. My father was in there. A massive coffin sat in the center of the hall. Inside lay the man who was my father in this life. I stared at his pale, still face for a long time. Suddenly, a wave of genuine grief crashed over me. "Dad," I whispered. The tears broke through. My knees hit the floor hard. This wasn't an act for the court. In that moment, I wasn't just mourning a Ming prince. I was thinking of my own parents back in the modern world. There is no greater pain than a parent burying their child. I was an only son. My parents had worked themselves to the bone to raise me, waiting for the day I'd start a family of my own. Then, a single car accident destroyed everything. Were they standing over my body right now, screaming my name? I thought of my father's graying hair and my mother's aging face. "Dad, Mom, your son failed you," I sobbed. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor over and over. I wasn't bowing to the crown prince of the Ming dynasty. I was bowing to the parents I had left behind, now alone with no one to rely on. I had been so busy chasing a living, leaving early and coming home late. I never took the time to truly be with them. I hadn't even noticed how old they had become. I always complained about being tired, ignoring the worried looks they gave me. They never cared about the money. They just wanted me to be happy. "I'll live," I promised them in my heart. "I will live well and stay healthy in this world. Please, bless me. If there's a next life, let me be your son again. I'll make it up to you." "Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad." The tears soaked my sleeves and the white mourning cloth around my neck. I was a mess of grief. "The Emperor has arrived," a voice bellowed. The room went silent. An old man appeared at the entrance. He wore simple clothes made of coarse cloth, his hair pinned back with a plain wooden stake. He was tall with a large frame, his hands and feet weathered and long. He looked thin, but not weak. His square face was framed by a beard that was half black, half white, reaching down to his chest. His eyes were the most striking part. They were bright, like two lamps capable of piercing through a man's soul. Right now, those eyes were swimming with sorrow, but he fought it. He refused to let a single tear fall. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. He walked forward with a perfectly straight back, his chest out. He moved like a tiger patrolling its territory. No one dared to look him in the eye. This was the man who founded an era. This was the Hongwu Emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang. "Greetings, Your Majesty. Long live the Emperor." The sobbing in the hall stopped instantly. Everyone hit the floor in a display of ultimate humility. "Long live." Zhu Yuanzhang's voice was a low growl. His bloodshot eyes stared at the coffin. He let out a cold, bitter laugh. "My son is gone, and you're shouting long live? Long live my ass." The palace went deathly quiet. He continued his slow march. Every step looked agonizingly heavy, despite his rigid posture. His cold gaze swept over the room. No one moved. He saw a sea of kneeling bodies, all pretending to mourn. He knew their grief was hollow compared to his. Then his eyes stopped on me. To him, I was Zhu Yunting, the grandson who was usually cowardly, slow-witted, and a bit of a brat. But right now, I was kneeling there, drenched in tears. My lips were bitten raw, blood trickling down my chin as I tried to stifle my sobs. I saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. He must have thought, maybe he's slow, but he's a good kid. He actually loved his father. As he passed, he gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. I slammed my head against the golden floor tiles 3 times. The thuds echoed through the silent hall. I looked up, my throat raw and scratchy, and let out a single word. Grandpa. That one word was thick with genuine emotion. It carried all the grief, the fear, and the longing I felt. It was the cry of a grandson who had lost everything. It was the one thing that could break the iron will of the emperor. A single tear finally escaped Zhu Yuanzhang's eye. He hurried to my side. His huge, calloused hand reached out, trembling slightly. He wanted to rub my head, but instead, he gripped my shoulder with crushing force. Child, he choked out. Grandpa is here. Grandpa is right here. Grandpa, I wailed. Looking at him, I saw my own grandfather back home, and the dam broke completely. I know, he whispered, squeezing my shoulder. I understand. He turned away and walked slowly toward the coffin. He looked at the face of the son who looked so much like him, yet had left the world before him. In that moment, the aura of the great Tiger King vanished. He was just a heartbroken old man. Biao, he whispered. He reached out to touch his son's face, but his hand, a hand that had ended thousands of lives, was shaking with fear. Zhu Biao was his pride and joy, the eldest son of his beloved empress. He had spent a lifetime grooming this boy to be the perfect ruler. He had given him the best teachers and the highest hopes. And Biao had never disappointed him. He was kind but firm, honest, and deeply loyal. He was the bridge between the emperor and his ministers, the glue that held the brothers together. He was the future of the Ming dynasty. And now he was gone. A heavy pressure built in Zhu Yuanzhang's chest. He wanted to scream. He wanted to wail. But he was the emperor. He had to bury his pain under the weight of the crown. Suddenly, his knees buckled. His hand lunged out, gripping the edge of the coffin to keep from falling. Your Majesty, Grandpa. The hall erupted in panic as the emperor's body slumped forward. He didn't fall. In that split second, as his body teetered, a pair of thin arms wrapped tightly around his waist. I held on with everything I had. Zhu Yuanzhang took a deep breath, fighting to steady his surging emotions. He looked down. He looked at me, the grandson everyone thought was weak, dim-witted, and a bit of a troublemaker. I was the one holding him up. Grandpa, I choked out, my voice thick with tears. You have to take care of yourself. Please. I buried my face in his robes, feeling the coarse fabric against my skin. A few days ago, at my father's bedside, he held my hand. I lied, though the grief in my voice was real. He told me you were getting older. He said your body is covered in old scars and wounds from decades of war. He told me I had to be a good son and take care of you. My tears soaked into his clothes. I didn't let go. Grandpa, please stay strong. You are my whole world. I lost my mother when I was little, and now my father is gone. I only have you left. I only have you. That was the breaking point. Zhu Yuanzhang, the Iron Emperor, couldn't hold back anymore. Tears streamed down his weathered face. People say the emperor lives 10,000 years, but he's still just a man. He gets old. He gets sick. He bleeds. And right now, looking at me, he saw a child who wasn't just mourning a father, but desperately clinging to his grandfather for survival. Grandpa is here, he whispered, his large hand trembling as he stroked my hair. Grandpa is right here. Don't be afraid. I won't fall. I can't fall. Suddenly, Lady Lu threw herself to the ground beside us. Your Majesty, she wailed. You must preserve your health. Yunwen and the other boys, they all rely on you. They need your guidance. As she cried, I saw her foot move. She gave her son, Zhu Yunwen, a sharp, hidden kick. Yunwen caught the hint immediately. He crawled forward on his knees, grabbing the edge of the emperor's robe. Grandfather, please take care, Yunwen sobbed. If you hurt yourself, it would be the ultimate act of filial impiety by your grandsons. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at me, then at Yunwen. His eyes were full of tenderness. He touched both our heads, his voice shaking. Good children. You're all good children. Grandfather, please sit and rest, Yunwen said, turning to the servants. Quick, bring a chair. My grandfather has a back injury. Bring a soft cushion. I watched this play out and felt a cold smirk forming in my mind. None of these royal descendants were stupid. I had just established a deep emotional bond with the emperor, and immediately, the other side stepped up to play the role of the dutiful grandson. In this world, I had no choice. If I didn't get Zhu Yuanzhang's absolute favor, I was dead. The path to power was my only way to survive. I wasn't going to let Zhu Yunwen steal my spotlight. As the servants helped the emperor toward the chair, I struck again. I pressed my forehead to the cold floor. Grandpa, I have one request. Zhu Yuanzhang waved his hand, his face still heavy with grief. Speak. Between us, there is no need for hesitation. I looked up, my eyes red and swollen. When my father was alive, I was reckless. I caused him so much worry. I wiped away a stray tear. Now that he's gone, I want to enter Huangjue Temple. I want to observe 3 years of mourning for him. I will eat simple food, pray to the Buddha every day, and chant sutras for him. And for you. I bowed again, my voice echoing in the silent hall. I want to accumulate merit for my father's soul and pray that you, Grandpa, live for 100 years. Please let me go. The hall went dead silent. Zhu Yuanzhang's heart skipped a beat. In this era, filial piety was everything. It was the ultimate measure of a man's character. And everyone knew the history. Zhu Yuanzhang himself had been a monk at Huangjue Temple when he was a starving boy. He looked at me, stunned. A 14-year-old boy was willing to give up 3 years of luxury and palace life to pray in a cold temple. He wanted to ensure his father's spirit found peace and his grandfather stayed healthy. It was an act of incredible devotion. I saw the shift in his eyes. The weak and stupid grandson was gone. In his place was a man who had grown up overnight through tragedy. He felt a pang of guilt. Had he ignored me for too long? Had he listened to the rumors instead of seeing the boy standing right in front of him? Grandpa, I whispered, crawling forward to rest my hands on his knees. Please, let me do this. I leaned my head against his leg, sobbing quietly. You silly child, he murmured, his own eyes brimming with tears as he stroked my hair. My silly, devoted child. The ministers and servants watched in awe. In this rigid, formal empire, the emperor was a god first and a grandfather second. But right now, he was just an old man comforting his favorite grandson. Lady Lu looked like she had seen a ghost. She had planned to tell Yunwen to suggest the temple mourning this morning, but I had beaten her to it. She panicked and nudged her son again. Yunwen scrambled forward, his face pale. Grandfather, I also want to mourn for my father at the temple. I didn't even look at him. I just smiled inwardly. Too late. I took the first step, and in this game, the first step is everything. I was the one who spoke from the heart. He was just copying me. In the emperor's mind, my devotion was pure. Yunwen's was just an afterthought. The first battle for the throne had begun, and I had already won. The spring night air turned chilly, blowing through the hall and making the candle flames dance. Our shadows stretched long across the floor. My legs were numb from kneeling, but I didn't move. Back in my old life, I worked myself to the bone just to pay rent. If I could handle that, I could handle this. This wasn't just about respect anymore. It was about life and death. The younger siblings had already fallen asleep in the arms of the palace maids. Only Lady Lu, Yunwen, and I remained awake in the dim light. Brother, I said softly, looking at Yunwen's exhausted face. If you're tired, go rest. I'll keep watch here. I turned to Lady Lu. Mother, you should rest too. You need to stay strong for father's funeral. Yunwen looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion. For the first time, he realized his stupid little brother was a stranger he didn't know at all. My third brother never used to be like this. I could feel Lady Lu's eyes boring into me, studying me with a mix of confusion and suspicion. In a single day, it was as if I had become a completely different person. The old Zhu Yunting was never this calm, never this considerate, and he certainly never took the initiative to speak to them. There was no reason for an older brother to go rest while the younger one kept watch. It broke every rule of filial hierarchy. Yunwen gave me a thin, forced smile. Third brother, you should be the one to rest. For the entire month before father passed, I was the one serving at his bedside. I'm used to the exhaustion. I saw right through him. In the imperial family, there is no such thing as brotherly love. My casual suggestion had triggered a massive defensive reaction from him. This wasn't a conversation, it was a show of force. He was marking his territory, reminding me who the devoted son really was. My memories confirmed it. For the last month of father's life, Yunwen had used his status as the eldest son to monopolize the bedside. But I also knew the truth. It wasn't that the original Yunting didn't want to serve his father. He simply wasn't allowed to get close. When the head of a house is dying, a stepmother will always push her own son into the spotlight to put on a show for the world. If you aren't her biological child, she'll hide you away so no one sees your good side. The Fomin Palace was silent, but I knew there were dozens of eyes and ears hidden in the shadows. Every word we spoke tonight would reach my grandfather's ears by morning. "Second brother, you've worked so hard," I said, my voice flat and neutral. "Ever since father fell ill, I don't know how many times I cried myself to sleep. I wanted to serve him so badly. But every time I tried to go to his room, mother blocked my way. She told me you were there and that I didn't need to worry. She said having one more person there would just be a distraction." I lowered my head and rubbed my eyes, letting my voice tremble slightly. I know mother meant well, but I am father's son too. The fact that I couldn't even hand him his medicine or serve him in his final days, it is the greatest regret of my life. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lady Lu's gaze turned sharp, almost lethal. She had started as a secondary consort, but after the original crown princess died, she had taken control of the East Palace. She had always been wary of me because I was the son of the legal wife, the true heir. Luckily for her, the old Yunting wasn't very bright, and she had kept him under her thumb. But today, everything had changed. Not only had I won the emperor's favor, but I was no longer speaking like a timid fool. Seeing how much the emperor had doted on me earlier made her blood run cold. She wasn't a simple woman. She had climbed her way up from a lowly position and knew exactly how to read the emperor. The emperor was not a man who showed emotion easily. The last time he had been this vulnerable was at the funeral of the late Empress Ma. For years, Lady Lu had plotted for her son to inherit the throne, but his status as a child of a consort was a thorn in her side. Now, the useless, legitimate son was suddenly charming the emperor. Hatred flickered in her eyes. A palace maid hurried over, whispered something into Lady Lu's ear, and retreated into the shadows. Lady Lu wiped a stray tear from her cheek. "Yunting, you've been crying and keeping watch all day. You must be starving. Go to the back hall, rest for a bit, and eat something." This was the first thing she had said directly to me all day. I weighed my options carefully. "Mother, I'm not tired. I'm not hungry," I replied. "Go," she said, her voice softening but her tone turning firm. "Your devotion is good, but you mustn't break your body. You go first. When you return, I'll let your brother take his turn." Her voice hardened. "Go. Be obedient. When a clear sky suddenly turns cloudy, there's always a storm coming." I knew something was wrong, but with so many people watching, I couldn't refuse. I bowed my head, gave a quiet acknowledgement, and pushed myself up on numb legs. I took a deep breath and walked toward the back hall. Lady Lu watched my back, her eyes like daggers. "Son, do you see?" she whispered to Yunwen. "You can know a person's face, but not their heart. Look at how well your third brother hid himself. Your father is barely gone, and he's already jumping out to play his hand." Yunwen looked thoughtful, but remained silent. Lady Lu leaned closer to his ear. "Before your father died, he told me to keep a respectful distance from your uncles. But I think the one you really need to watch out for is this brother of yours." I reached the back hall, and, seeing no one around, stretched my stiff arms. This palace was no place for a human being. Every word, every step, had to be calculated. It was only my first day after transmigrating, and it was already this exhausting. How was I going to survive the future? The answer was simple. I had to keep the emperor's favor. I had to get that throne. Only then would life be truly good. Only then could I do whatever I wanted. I paced the floor, thinking. To a legendary emperor like Zhu Yuanzhang, charm wasn't enough. I needed to prove my ability. I knew history, sure, but how could I show him I was capable of ruling? I stopped walking. A smile spread across my face. My greatest advantage was the same as Zhu Yuanzhang's. We were both children of commoners. I knew how hard life was for the people. I knew the value of a single grain of rice. My personal eunuch, Wang Bachi, emerged from the shadows. "Third master, what would you like to eat? I'll prepare it for you." I rubbed my stomach. "Just a bowl of noodles. With some meat." Yes, master, he whispered, vanishing back into the darkness. I looked out at the great Ming Palace. It was grand, but not flashy. Both the emperor and my late father were frugal men. They hated wasting the people's money on luxury. The red lacquer on the pillars was peeling and faded, but it had never been repainted. The emperor treated the empire like a common household. If something still worked, you didn't waste money replacing it. Footsteps approached. 2 guards with heavy swords at their waists knelt before me. We pay our respects to the third master. They were brothers, muscular and sturdy. My memories recognized them immediately, Liao Yong and Liao Ming. They were the grandsons of the late Duke of Chu. Their grandfather, Liao Yongzhong, was the man who had personally drowned the emperor's former rival to clear his path to the throne. In the history I knew, these 2 brothers were legendary for their loyalty, eventually dying for their principles. It's you too, I said, reaching out to help them up. Are you on duty? It's late. You should find a place to rest. The brothers shared a look. Liao Yong leaned in and whispered, Master, the emperor is heading this way right now. The emperor was coming back. I turned sharply, looking back toward the main hall where Lady Lu was waiting. Suddenly, I understood. No wonder she had been so desperate to kick me out of the room. Lady Lu had been so desperate to kick me out. Now I knew why. The emperor was coming back, and she wanted me far away from him. She wanted to be the only one there to show off her grief. She probably planned to paint me as the disrespectful son who couldn't even stay for a vigil. It was a cold, bloodless move. I looked back at the Liao brothers. You've done me a great favor, I said quietly. I won't forget this. We wouldn't dare take credit, master, Liao Yong replied. Our family owes everything to the crown prince. He gave us a future when we had nothing. I nodded. In this palace, loyalty was rare. These 2 were my father's men, and they were worth keeping close. I know who is truly on my side, I told them. Thank you for the warning. Heavy footsteps echoed from the front hall. The emperor had arrived. Long live the emperor, the guards and servants cried out, kneeling. Zhu Yuanzhang brushed past them impatiently. He walked straight toward the coffin. Being the emperor meant he was never truly free. Even when his favorite son died, he couldn't just sit and mourn. He had an empire to run. The Mongols were stirring in the north, and heavy rains in the south threatened the spring harvest. If war broke out, the people would suffer. If the crops failed, they would starve. All that weight sat on his old shoulders. He had spent the entire evening buried in state affairs, suppressing his agony to rule. Now, in the dead of night, he just wanted to be a father one last time. Your Majesty, Lady Lu sobbed, bowing low alongside her son, Zhu Yunwen. The emperor looked around the dim room. Where is Teng'er? Lady Lu didn't miss a beat. Replying to your Majesty, Teng'er said he was tired. He wanted to find a place to rest. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't say anything explicitly bad about me, but the implication was clear. I was lazy, disrespectful, and didn't care about my father's memory. She peeked at the emperor, waiting for his anger to flare. But he didn't react. He seemed like he hadn't even heard her. He just nodded slowly. You all leave. I want to stay here alone for a while. Lady Lu hesitated. But your Majesty. Zhu Yunwen stepped forward. Grandfather, let me stay and accompany you. I said, everyone out. The emperor repeated, his voice cold. You've been tired for a long time. Go rest. When the emperor spoke, it was law. Lady Lu and her son had no choice but to bow and retreat, leaving the hall empty. The night wind chilled the air, tugging at the emperor's white beard. Finally alone, the iron mask crumbled. He looked at my father's pale, still face inside the coffin. His heart felt like it was being shredded by a dull knife. He reached out a trembling hand, touching his son's cold skin. My son, he whispered, his voice breaking. You really left me. You didn't leave your old man a single thing to hold on to. He pulled his hand back, sobbing quietly. Why did you go? I raised you for 40 years. I loved you for 40 years. I trained you for 40 years. And you just left. He wiped his eyes with a rough sleeve. Your mother left me first. Now you've left your father all alone in this world. His grief turned to a desperate, angry plea. You unfilial son. Get up. Look at your father. Look at my white hair. I'm supposed to go before you, not the other way around. How am I supposed to live? The hall was filled with the sound of an old man's heart breaking. Suddenly, he froze. He heard soft footsteps behind him. "I told you all to leave," he barked, turning around with a fierce glare. But he stopped mid-breath. There I was, standing in the candlelight. I was holding a steaming bowl of noodle soup. Tears were streaming down my face, dripping right into the broth. "Grandfather," I choked out. "I heard you hadn't eaten all day. I had someone make this for you." I walked toward him slowly, careful not to spill a drop. The emperor stayed in the shadows, wiping his face with his large, calloused hands. "How did you know I hadn't eaten?" he asked, his voice thick. "I figured you wouldn't have an appetite today," I said, stirring the noodles with a pair of chopsticks. The scent of ginger and garlic filled the air. "You came this morning, then went back to handle the empire. All the burdens of great Ming are on your shoulders." My father used to sigh at night, saying how hard you worked. The emperor's eyes welled up again. Among all his grandsons, none had ever been this perceptive. On a day like today, who could think of food? But the empire was in ruins, and he couldn't afford to be weak. He forced a small smile. "Take it away. I'm not hungry." "Even if you aren't, please eat a little," I said sincerely. "This morning, you told me that taking care of myself and staying alive is true filial piety. If you take care of your body and stay healthy, that is the greatest gift you can give us, your grandchildren." I handed him the chopsticks, my voice trembling. Father's spirit is right here. If he sees us eating and taking care of ourselves, he'll be at peace. The emperor was visibly moved. You've really grown up, Tongue." He rolled up his sleeves and gave a strained laugh. "Fine. We'll share this bowl. We'll both stay healthy." The emperor had come from a poor family. He loved strong flavors like ginger and garlic. As we shared the noodles, the steam rising between us, we both kept wiping our eyes. The dead were gone, but the living had to keep going. Rituals were for show, but this was for my father. When the noodles were gone, I picked up the bowl and drank the hot soup in big gulps. I even used the chopsticks to scoop out the bits of ginger and garlic at the bottom. "Why are you eating the scraps?" the emperor asked, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. "Are you still hungry? Go get a real meal." I put the bowl down and wiped my mouth with my sleeve, just like he did. 1 grain of rice, 1 bowl of soup. We must remember they are hard-won. Every thought, every moment, we must guard against greed and waste. I started cleaning up the dishes. Father always taught me that the people work hard to support us. We must cherish every grain. I used to be such a fool, demanding 6 dishes and a soup every meal. I was the biggest idiot in the Zhu family. I turned to leave, but the emperor called out, his voice sharp with curiosity. "Wait, 1 grain of rice, 1 bowl of soup. We must remember they are hard-won. Where did you learn that?" He looked at me intently. Those words hit him right in the heart. He was born a peasant. His ancestors were farmers who worked the land all year and still went hungry. To him, there was no greater virtue than remembering where you came from. The emperor had come from nothing. From a starving farm boy to the ruler of the Ming dynasty, he had seen the worst of the world. He never forgot the struggle of the common people. Even as an emperor, trapped behind the golden walls and forced into wasteful imperial rituals, he hated the excess. My simple words about the value of a single grain of rice struck him right where it mattered. It was the code of a true ruler. I felt his eyes on me, sharp and piercing. I kept my expression solemn. "I spoke from the heart, grandfather," I said firmly. "Come here," he commanded. "Get closer to me." I put down the bowls and moved to his side, crouching low so I had to look up at him. The hall was dim, lit only by flickering candles, but the emperor's eyes were terrifyingly bright. It felt like he was looking straight into my soul, peeling back every layer of my disguise. "Tung-er," he whispered, his voice heavy. "Tell me the truth. That foolish, clumsy act you've been putting up all these years, was it a lie?" I lowered my head, my voice barely a murmur. "Yes." "Why?" he barked, the sudden volume echoing off the cold stone walls. I looked up again, letting tears shimmer in my eyes. I was afraid. "Afraid of what?" he demanded. He didn't wait for my answer. He already knew. I was a legitimate son who had lost his mother. In this deep, treacherous palace, I had no siblings from the same womb to protect me. I had no mother to shield me from the shadows. My very existence was a threat because of my status. Countless eyes were watching me from the dark, waiting for a single slip-up to tear me apart. If I hadn't hidden my sharp edges and played the fool, I would have been a thorn in everyone's side. I would have been destroyed long ago. The Emperor's face twisted. A flash of anger crossed his features, and he raised his hand as if to strike me. "You brat. You deserve a beating." He stopped himself, his hand trembling in midair. He pointed a finger at me instead. "Your father was the crown prince. Your grandfather is the emperor. Who were you afraid of? Why didn't you come to me with your grievances?" He took a sharp breath, his voice softening with a trace of fear. "Are you not afraid anymore?" "I deserve to be punished," I said, and then I did something he didn't expect. I slapped my own face. Hard. The sound cracked through the silent hall. "I am the biggest fool in the world. I failed my father, and I failed you, grandfather." I looked him in the eye, my voice steady now. To be a son and not show one's true self is the greatest filth. To be a grandson and a subject, yet fail to share the burdens of my father and emperor, is the ultimate betrayal. I chose to be a coward just to save my own skin. I became a man without loyalty or filial piety. The emperor stared at me. He heard the logic in my words, the depth of my learning, and the weight of my regret. His anger vanished, replaced by a crushing sense of pity. I was only 14. To have this much restraint, this much calculation, and this much knowledge at such a young age was unheard of. Even the most seasoned scholars couldn't have articulated it better. He saw a spark in me, a seedling that could grow into something massive. That one sentence about the rice and soup had convinced him. I was the hidden gem of the Zhu family. I wiped my eyes and looked at him with newfound iron in my gaze. "Grandfather, I'm not afraid anymore." "Why not?" he asked. "I used to have 2 mountains standing behind me," I said slowly. "One was my father. The other was you. My father is gone now. There is only you left. I already failed him. I refuse to fail you." A look of pure, unyielding resolve took over my face. In that moment, the emperor didn't see a boy. He saw a reflection of himself, the man who had seized the throne and built an empire from blood and dirt. "I am your legitimate grandson," I continued. "I am the son of the crown prince. If I keep living in a daze, if I keep cowering from palace schemes, then I am a disgrace. If I don't show the world who I am, I don't deserve the name Zhu." "Good boy." The emperor's heavy hand landed on my shoulder. For the first time, a genuine smile broke through his grief. "A real man should have spirit. Now you finally look like my grandson." He glanced back at the coffin where my father lay. "And a worthy son to your father." Outside the palace, Lady Lu was pacing like a caged animal. She didn't dare enter. A servant had told her I went in with a bowl of noodles, and she had assumed I'd be kicked out for disturbing the emperor's mourning. But I hadn't come out. The muffled sound of conversation had been drifting through the doors for a long time. Her heart felt like a lead weight. The emperor had shown me more affection today than any other prince or grandson. She looked at her own son, Zhu Yunwan, who was staring at the doors with a strange expression. "Son, what are you thinking?" she whispered. "I'm wondering," Yunwan said, his voice cold, "if my brother has been faking it this whole time." Lady Lu's eyes widened. If I had been pretending to be an idiot, it meant I had been guarding against them for years. If the emperor realized I was actually brilliant, her son's future was in jeopardy. "Your grandfather has been in there a long time," Lady Lu said, her face tightening. "He must be thirsty. Take some tea in. And remember, when you get in there, you cry." Yunwen nodded, but before he could move, the doors creaked open. The emperor stepped out, leaning slightly on my arm for support. Everyone outside immediately dropped to their knees. "Greetings, Your Majesty." Lady Lu looked up and noticed the emperor's grief seemed to have lifted slightly. I walked beside him, my face a mask of calm. "You are weak," the emperor said to me, his voice stern but caring. "You need to take care of yourself. Honoring your father is good, but making yourself sick is a different kind of disrespect." "I will remember your words, grandfather," I replied. "Once the funeral rites are over, you will go to the Great Academy," he ordered. "I'll find the best teachers for you. We'll see if you can keep up the act when they're breathing down your neck." "I won't let you down," I promised. The Great Academy was where the elite princes studied. My father had been taught there by the greatest scholars in the land. The emperor began to walk away, but as he passed Lady Lu, his gaze turned icy. She shivered, feeling a sudden, unexplained dread. "We are leaving," the emperor announced. He took a few steps, then suddenly stopped. He turned back, looking at me with an intensity that silenced the entire courtyard. "Issue an edict," he commanded. His personal scribe hurried forward, brush ready. "Zhu Yunting, legitimate son of the crown prince, my legitimate grandson. He is of noble character, possesses great talent, and has shown profound filial piety and strength of will." The emperor paused, his voice booming. "I hereby enfeoff Zhu Yunting as the king of Wu." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I immediately dropped to my knees to give thanks. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I fought to keep my body from trembling. Wu. That was the title the emperor himself held before he founded the Ming dynasty. In the entire empire, among all the kings and princes, it was the most prestigious title possible. The emperor nodded, pleased by my composure. He didn't know that inside, I was screaming with triumph. The title of King of Wu was just the beginning. The silence that followed the emperor's words was deafening. Whether they were servants, guards, or mourners, everyone gasped in unison. Wu. That was the national title before the founding of the Ming dynasty. Now, it belonged to me, the legitimate grandson of the Hongwu emperor. I could feel the eyes of the crowd shifting. The fear was still there, but now it was laced with a deep, heavy reverence. Lady Lu looked like she was about to bite through her own lip. I knew what she was thinking. She had once tried to test the waters with my father, the late crown prince, asking if her own son, Zhu Yunwan, could be granted the title of King of Wu since he was the eldest. My father had scolded her ruthlessly for it. He told her that Wu was the emperor's former title, a land of wealth and strategic importance, and it was not to be given away lightly. Yet here it was, resting on my shoulders. Zhu Yunwan looked completely stunned. He stared at me for a long time, his face a blank mask, before slowly lowering his head. No one saw the flash of resentment in his eyes as he looked at the ground. He was the eldest son in name, even if he was born to a secondary wife. In his mind, seniority should have mattered. He had every reason to be bitter. He was better at his studies than the old me, he was more handsome, and he was known for being humble and cautious. The court officials loved him. But in this world, the word legitimate carried a weight that no amount of talent could balance. Grandfather didn't leave immediately after issuing the edict. He scanned the crowd, reading every face, before his gaze softened and landed on Zhu Yunwan. If I was the surprise of the day, Yunwan was the grandson he had always loved. My grandfather was a man who rose from nothing. He and his brothers grew up in army camps, swinging blades and riding horses. To them, studying was a chore, but fighting was life. Most of the third generation followed that path. They were either obsessed with military glory or lost in wine and women. Yunwan was different. He was a scholar, a gentleman, and a filial son. Grandfather might have hated Lady Lu, but he truly loved this boy. Zhu Yunwan, my eldest grandson, the emperor called out. Yunwan looked up, tears springing to his eyes. My eldest grandson is brilliant, studious, and humble, grandfather announced, his voice booming. He is kind to the ministers and filial to his kin. I hereby enfeoff Zhu Yunwan as the king of Huai. Yunwan bowed low, his voice trembling with gratitude. I thank your majesty for his immense grace. As he rose, he gave me a long, meaningful look. Beside him, Lady Lu began to sob with joy, thanking the emperor. But the moment she opened her mouth, grandfather's expression soured. He looked at her with pure disgust. In his mind, this woman was the reason his legitimate grandson had spent years acting like a fool out of fear. If we weren't standing in front of my father's coffin, I'm sure he would have had her dragged away right then. He turned on his heel and stormed off without another word. King of Huai. I played the title over in my mind. The Zhu family were people of Huai. It was where my grandfather started his journey and where all the founding nobles of the empire came from. Giving Yunwan that title was deeply symbolic, but it wasn't the same. I met Yunwan's gaze. Your Huai will never be as noble as my Wu, I thought. In the race for the throne, I've taken the lead. I don't plan on losing. After the emperor left, I returned to Feng'an Palace to kneel before my father's coffin. The man inside was the only thing that had kept the empire stable. Now that he was gone, the position of crown prince was a void, and my uncles, the powerful princes stationed across the borders, were starting to get restless. A cold wind blew through the hall. I looked out into the distance, thinking of my real rivals. It wasn't just Yunwen. It was my uncle, Zhu Di, the Prince of Yen. In history, he would become the Yongle Emperor, a man whose military achievements rivaled the greatest emperors of old. He was a warrior who led from the front, a man of incredible courage and terrifying ambition. He was my ultimate enemy. On the 25th day of the 4th month, we buried my father. The rain had stopped, and the spring sun was warm, but there was no life in the air. The funeral procession was a sea of white. Thousands of officials followed the massive coffin on foot, as the emperor had forbidden horses or carriages for the mourning period. Yunwen supported Lady Lu, while I walked beside the coffin with my 2 younger sisters. The little girls were exhausted, their faces streaked with dust and tears. They kept tripping over their long mourning robes. "Come here," I whispered, kneeling down. "Brother will carry you." I picked them both up, one in each arm. This body was weak, and my legs felt like lead with every step, but I didn't let go. I gritted my teeth and kept walking, one heavy footprint at a time. The officials watching us began to whisper. "The King of Wu truly loves his sisters," they said. "A brother acting as a father, the crown prince would be proud." In the military ranks, General Lan Yu watched me with bloodshot eyes. He turned to the other Huaishi generals. "What do you think the emperor means by giving the kid the title of Wu?" "He's a king now. Isn't that good enough?" one general grunted. "It was the emperor's own title." Lan Yu snapped. "You idiot, there's more to it than that." He looked around cautiously, then leaned toward a subordinate. "Go. Find Minister Zhang Hui. I need to talk to him." Zhang Hui was the Minister of Personnel. Since grandfather had abolished the position of Prime Minister, the 6 ministers reported directly to him. If anyone knew which way the wind was blowing regarding the next heir, it was him. Grandfather had strengthened the central government and tightened his grip on power, but the Ming dynasty was barely 20 years old. The empire was unified, but the roots weren't deep yet. In these early days, the line between civil officials and military generals was blurry. They all ran in the same circles, bound by old favors and family ties. So, when Lan Yu sent word for Zhang Hui to come over, the man didn't hesitate. Zhang Hui was a high-ranking civil official, a minister of personnel, yet he walked right into the middle of the grimy military ranks without a second thought. "Old Zhang," Lan Yu whispered, pulling him close. "You've read all the books. You're the smart one. Tell us, what do you think the emperor meant by giving the 3rd prince the title of King of Wu?" Zhang Hui glanced around cautiously. Wu was the title His Majesty held before he took the throne. "It means, give me the real talk," Lan Yu snapped, eyes narrowing. "Don't give me that scholar nonsense." Zhang Hui didn't get angry. He lowered his voice. "In my opinion, it means the position of imperial heir is likely going to fall on that boy's head. Shouldn't it? The King of Wu is the crown prince's direct heir. It's only natural." Zhang Hui shook his head slowly. "A grandson isn't always the chosen one. Didn't you notice? Yesterday, the emperor also titled the 2nd prince as the King of Huai." The generals went quiet. Huai was their homeland. They were all Huai people at their core. One title was the emperor's pre-regnal name. The other was the name of the imperial family's ancestral home. It was a toss-up. "I don't care about all that," Hirong, the Earl of Dongguan, grunted like the old soldier he was. "I only recognize the King of Wu. The 3rd prince is the crown prince's legitimate son. His mother was the daughter of General Chang Yechen. That's enough for me." The others nodded in agreement, but Lan Yu remained silent, lost in thought. "Are you so sure it'll go to the grandson?" Lan Yu whispered into Zhang Hui's ear. "The crown prince is gone, but the other princes are in their prime." As he spoke, a formidable image flashed through Lan Yu's mind. The king of Yen, Zhu Di. Zhu Di was stationed in Beiping, guarding the northern gates of the empire. From a military standpoint, Lan Yu admired him. Zhu Di had led several campaigns deep into the desert, shattering the Mongol forces. His soldiers were fierce, loyal, and dangerous. But personally, Lan Yu feared him. A few years ago, when Lan Yu was appointed great general to campaign in the north, he realized something terrifying. The veteran generals were dying off, leaving Lan Yu as the top military man in the empire. Yet, he couldn't command Zhu Di's troops. Those elite soldiers didn't care about the great general or the imperial court. They only recognized the king of Yin. Lan Yu had written to my father, the crown prince, warning him that Zhu Di had ambitions. But father was too kind. He loved his brothers and wouldn't listen. Or maybe he did listen, but knew that as long as he was alive, Zhu Di would never dare to move. But now, father was dead. If I took the throne, would Zhu Di stay quiet? Lan Yu's lips curled into a cold smirk. He wasn't afraid of a rebellion. He was afraid of not having a chance to crush it. If the king of Yin dared to rise against me, Lan Yu would settle all the old scores at once. Still, a seed of doubt remained. What if grandfather didn't choose me? I was young, and in the eyes of the court, I had never shown the qualities of a great ruler. Lan Yu's rugged face softened with a hint of loneliness. He owed his entire life to two people. First was my grandfather-in-law, Chang Yuchen, who had plucked Lan Yu from the ranks of common soldiers. Second was my father. Father had been his shield, defending Lan Yu's arrogant behavior and promoting him time and again. I'm a rough man, Lan Yu muttered to himself. But I know loyalty. The heir must be the third prince. If it isn't, I'll put him on that throne myself, even if it costs me my life. It's the only way I can face my sister's husband and the crown prince in the afterlife. Meanwhile, back at the Forbidden City, the sun shone down on the blooming flowers of the Fengtian Palace. Grandfather sat alone in a garden pavilion. His face was like still water, unreadable and cold. The guards and servants stayed 10 paces back, barely daring to breathe. On the stone table, next to him, sat a simple porcelain bowl. Inside was golden millet porridge with a single peeled egg. There were 2 small side dishes and a piece of flatbread. It was a meal so humble, it was hard to believe he was the most powerful man on earth. He wore plain cloth robes. He never forgot his roots as a starving peasant boy who had toiled in the fields with his brothers. He knew the value of every grain of rice. He knew that even now, many of his people were still going hungry. The porridge grew cold. The steam vanished. Huang Goer, the emperor's personal eunuch, finally gathered his courage and stepped forward. Your Majesty, please, eat something. Huang Goer was over 50. He had served in the old Mongol palace before being captured and brought here. Grandfather loathed eunuchs. To him, they weren't even people. They were just tools to handle his daily chores. If Huang Goer hadn't served him faithfully for decades, he wouldn't have dared to speak. I can't eat, grandfather said. His voice was heavy with grief. Today was the day of father's funeral. He had no appetite. Take it away. Save it for my dinner. Your Majesty. Huang Goer suddenly dropped to his knees, his head hitting the floor. I beg you. You haven't eaten properly in days. Your body can't take it. I am just a useless servant, but it breaks my heart to see you like this. Grandfather started to flare up, but the words, breaks my heart, softened him. He hated eunuchs, but he wasn't heartless. I understand, grandfather said, standing up. Take it away. I'm just not hungry. He began to pace the garden. He looked at the vibrant flowers, and a wave of loneliness washed over him. When the Empress was still here, he murmured, she used to say it was a waste to plant flowers in the palace. She wanted to plant vegetables instead, raise some chickens and ducks. He chuckled weakly, the memory bitter. I laughed at her back then. I told her she was a beggar holding a golden bowl. His eyes clouded with pain. I should have listened to her. He remembered the early days in Yingtian. Food was scarce. The Empress had planted crops right in the prince's manor. While he was out fighting, she and the boys worked the fields. The eldest was always so obedient, grandfather whispered. He did whatever he was told. But the fourth son, he was a brat. He'd work for a minute, then go off to practice with his wooden sword. I remember coming home once and seeing them all harvesting together. His face, which had briefly flickered with a smile, suddenly twisted into a mask of rage. He lunged forward, his heavy boots stomping violently onto the blooming flowers. What's the point of looking so beautiful? He roared, crushing the petals into the dirt. Can I eat you? Can I drink you? Who are you blooming for? My wife is gone. My son is gone. And you're still standing there looking pretty? Damn you all. He was an old man, but he still had the strength of a soldier. Within seconds, the carefully manicured garden was a ruined mess of broken stems and mud. Your Majesty, a voice called out from behind him, interrupting his fury. Grandfather's rage cooled as quickly as it had flared. He straightened his robes and took a deep breath, signaling for the visitor to enter. It was Lu Sanwu, a man who looked every bit the dignified scholar. In our world, since the position of prime minister had been abolished, a man like Lu Sanwu was the closest thing to it. Grandfather didn't hate scholars like the rumors said. He just hated the ones who were all talk and no action. He respected men of character, men who actually cared about the people. My emperor, Lu Sanwu said, bowing low. He was in his 50s, his face refined and calm. Grandfather waved a hand. Sit. He even ordered a chair for him. Huang Guer, the head eunuch, personally hurried to bring a stool. Lu Sanwu sat down without a word of thanks, and Huang Guer didn't dare ask for one. He just stepped back into the shadows. Grandfather pulled up a stool of his own and sat face to face with the old scholar. He dismissed the workers in the garden with a sharp gesture. The guards retreated 20 paces, their hands tight on their sword hilts, watching the perimeter like hawks. The atmosphere turned heavy. I called you here for a reason, Grandfather said, his voice low and gravelly. It's about the succession. I felt a chill run down my spine. Lu Sanwu's expression didn't change, but I could tell his heart skipped a beat. With the crown prince gone, the empire was a powder keg. The emperor was old. The sons were powerful. The court was full of hidden currents. Does your majesty wish to discuss the appointment of an heir? Lu Sanwu asked. I do, Grandfather sighed. The crown prince is gone. My heart feels empty. But the throne cannot stay vacant. You're a man of learning. Talk to me. Lu Sanwu didn't answer right away. He stood up, adjusted his robes, and knelt formally on the ground. What are you doing? Grandfather asked. I told you to talk, not to kneel. Lu Sanwu looked up, his face grim. I request that your majesty appoint a grand imperial grandson as the heir. Grandfather's hand, which had been reaching out to pull the old man up, froze in midair. His eyes narrowed. Why? Succession should pass from father to son, Lu Sanwu said firmly. It is the natural order. The crown prince's lineage is the legitimate line. The grandson is of age. He should inherit the great Ming. He lowered his head to the floor. Grandfather stayed silent for a long time. I knew what he was thinking. He wanted to appoint a grandson, but as a father and a ruler, he was torn. He had other sons, warriors, heroes, men who had bled for this empire. He wanted the scholar to give him an excuse, or perhaps to challenge his own doubts. The crown prince is gone, Grandfather mused, standing up and pacing slowly. But I have other sons. My sons at the borders are not as perfect as their brother was, but they are strong. Take the Prince of Yen, my fourth son. He leads the northern armies. He is brave, decisive, and proven in battle. Is he not a good choice? If you choose the Prince of Yen, Lu Sanwu countered, his voice ringing out. Where does that leave the Prince of Qin and the Prince of Jin? He was talking about my second and third uncles. According to tradition, you couldn't just skip the older brothers to pick the fourth. It would be a slap in the face to the entire social order. Plus, there was a secret everyone knew but no one dared mention. The Prince of Yin wasn't born to the late empress. He wasn't a legitimate son in the eyes of the law. The Prince of Yin holds the northern border, Lu Sanwu continued. But the princes of Qin and Jin also hold massive armies. If you pass them over for their younger brother, what happens when you are gone? Do you not remember the bloody rebellions of the past? The wars between princes that tore dynasties apart. Bull, Grandfather barked, turning around. Are you saying my sons will turn their blades on each other after I'm gone? Lu Sanwu didn't flinch. I am simply speaking the truth of history. Grandfather let out a sharp, bitter laugh. He wasn't really angry. He was frustrated because he knew the scholar was right. His sons were lions. If he picked one, the others would try to tear him down. The only way to keep the peace was to follow the rules of legitimacy. So, Grandfather said, sitting back down, you say I must pick a grandson. But will my sons accept a boy? I'm old. My feet are already in the grave. If the grandson I pick can't control his uncles, there will be war anyway. The grand imperial grandson has the mandate of heaven, Lu Sanwu argued. He is the son of the late crown prince. He has the legal right. If the princes rebel against that, they are rebels against the state. The court will stand behind the rightful heir. Grandfather nodded slowly. It made sense. If he picked the Prince of Yen, The older brothers would fight him based on rank. But if he picked a grandson, the law was on the boy's side. Still, he looked troubled. My uncles were not men who cared much for rules when power was on the line. Fine, grandfather said. Of the crown prince's sons, which one should it be? Lu Sanwa hesitated. This was the most dangerous question of all. I would not dare to say, the scholar whispered. Grandfather laughed, though there was no joy in it. Look at you. You'll tell me things that make me want to execute you, but when I ask for a name, you go quiet. Speak. We are alone. I won't punish you for your honesty. Lu Sanwu went silent, his mind clearly racing through the options. There was my brother, Zhu Yunwen. He was a year older than me, a favorite among the scholars, kind and studious. Then there was me, Zhu Yunting. I was the legitimate son of the primary wife, but to them, I was just the slow-witted one who struggled with his lessons. I believe, Lu Sanwu said, sneaking a glance at grandfather's face, that the eldest surviving son, Zhu Yunwen, is the best choice. He is diligent, he loves to learn, and he carries the spirit of his father. He could be named the imperial grandson, Lu Sanwu suggested. Grandfather fell silent. He narrowed his eyes, his mind working behind a mask of contemplation. He let out a long, heavy sigh. Yunwen is a good boy, he said softly, but he is not the legitimate son of the primary wife. Lu Sanwu froze. He was stunned. In the eyes of the law, Zhu Yunwen was the eldest surviving son. His mother had been promoted to the position of primary consort after the first wife passed away. Technically, that made him legitimate enough. But grandfather's words meant something else. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he thinking of me? Lu Sanwa's mind must have been racing. He probably pictured me, Zhu Yunting, the boy who fell asleep during every lecture and caused nothing but trouble. To a scholar like him, picking me over the studious Yunwen was madness. It would be better to pick the Prince of Yin than a slow-witted boy who couldn't stay awake in class. You think Yunting is a hopeless delinquent, don't you? Grandfather asked, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. I would not presume, Your Majesty, Lu Sanwu stammered. You have a poor eye for talent, Lu, grandfather said, his voice turning serious. The Prince of Wu, my Yunting, acts weak and unruly on the surface, but underneath, he is a 1,000-mile stallion of the Zhu family. He is the real deal. He stared intensely at the old scholar. Once the funeral rites are over, he will return to the Great Academy. I want you to teach him well. And listen closely. Not a single soul is to hear of this conversation. Not one. I obey your command, Lu Sanwu whispered, bowing low. The funeral passed in a blur of incense and white robes. A few days later, the May sun was warm and bright. Birds chirped in the palace gardens, and the air smelled of blooming flowers. I stood in my courtyard, gasping for air. My lungs burned. This body was a wreck. My arms and legs were thin, weak, and underdeveloped. After just one set of burpees and some core strength training this morning, every muscle I owned was screaming in pain. I couldn't stay like this. If I was going to carry the weight of an empire, I needed a body that wouldn't break. A man without strength has no presence. Even the pretty boy idols from my old life spent hours in the gym. If I was going to be the second-generation ruler of the Ming dynasty, I might have to lead armies. I needed to be a soldier, not a scholar with brittle bones. I ignored the soreness and started practicing military combat forms. I punched the air, my movements sharp and deliberate. Is third brother practicing martial arts? I heard a small voice behind me. My two younger sisters, Ninger and Xiao, were peering through the window. They were the daughters of my father's secondary consorts, just like me. After returning from the tombs, I had moved them into the quarters next to mine so I could look after them. My younger brothers had their own mothers to care for them, but these girls felt like my responsibility now. My eunuch, Wang Bachi, smiled at them. I can't tell what he's doing, princesses, but he looks mighty impressive. Third brother is amazing, little Xiao shouted, waving her hand. I finished my routine with a final strike and let out a long breath. The servants stepped forward to help me change. Today was the day I had to return to the Great Academy. The old Zhu Yunting used to get a headache just thinking about books. He would do anything to skip class, but I knew better. School wasn't just about learning, it was my stage. It was the place where I would prove to the world who I really was. I looked in the mirror. I wore the golden dragon robes of a prince of the blood. A black gauze cap sat on my head, framed by a crisp white collar. A pure white jade belt cinched my waist, and thick-soled boots made me stand taller. Because we were still in a period of mourning, I couldn't wear colorful tassels or pouches, but the simplicity made the outfit look even more dignified. I liked what I saw. This was a man's outfit. It was 1,000 times better than the zombie robes and pigtails of the later Qing dynasty. I stared at my reflection. I had been given this life and this identity. I had a responsibility now. I wanted to take this ancient country and set it on a path the world had never seen. No more starving peasants. No more isolation. I wanted Chinese sails to dominate the oceans and Chinese law to be heard in every corner of the globe. There would be no unequal treaties on my watch. Your Highness, Wang Bachi whispered. I saw his eyes welling with tears in the reflection. If only the late consort Chang could see you now. He wasn't talking about the current Empress Dowager. He was talking about my birth mother, the daughter of the legendary General Chang Yechen. She had died years ago. Wang Bachi had served me since I was an infant. To him, I wasn't just a prince. I was the boy he had raised. Seeing me finally grow up and take things seriously was clearly overwhelming for him. I turned and patted his shoulder. I appreciate your loyalty, I said simply. Those 4 words were enough to make the old man break down into tears of joy. I smiled at my sisters through the window. I'm going to school now. Stay out of trouble. I walked out of the gates. A soft sedan chair was waiting, held by several burly eunuchs. A group of guards stood nearby, their hands on the hilts of their blades. Please enter the sedan, Prince of Wu, a guard said, bowing. I laughed. I'm not 80 years old yet. Why would I sit in that? I waved them off. We're walking. Yes, Your Highness. The guards signaled for the eunuchs to move the chair aside. I took the lead, walking with my hands behind my back. 6 guards in embroidered robes followed me, their boots thumping rhythmically against the stone. Third brother looked so cool. I heard the girls whispering behind me. I felt the eyes of the palace staff on me as I marched through the courtyards. Usually, princes and princesses were carried everywhere in hidden litters. It looked wealthy, sure, but it lacked power. Seeing a prince walking boldly with a squad of armed guards was a rare sight. It commanded respect. The Forbidden City in Nanjing was a masterpiece of red walls and golden tiles. The air was sweet with the scent of early spring. I kept a brisk pace, my posture straight. This way, Your Highness, the lead guard said, bowing as he guided me toward the threshold of the great academy. I looked at him. He seemed familiar. I know your face, I said, but I can't place the name. I am Fu Rang, Your Highness, he said respectfully. Ah, the son of the Duke of Ing, I said with a smile. No wonder you look so sharp. Fu Rang's face lit up. Everyone likes a compliment, especially from a prince. He was the 3rd son of Fu Yud, one of my grandfather's top generals. How is the old duke? I asked as we walked. I noticed he looked a bit unwell during the funeral. Thank you for your concern, Highness. My father is fine. Don't minimize it, I said. His generation fought across the whole country with my grandfather. They crawled through piles of dead bodies to build this empire. They're covered in old scars and hidden injuries. At their age, you can't be careless. I paused, looking him in the eye. That generation doesn't know how to rest. But as their juniors, we have to remember for them. I have some high-quality medicinal herbs in the East Palace. Come by later and take some for him. Fu Rang's father had been close friends with my grandfather and my late father. He was part of my inner circle, even if he didn't know it yet. Fu Rang looked genuinely moved. I thank Your Highness on behalf of my father. I stopped walking. We had arrived. I looked back and smiled. No need for thanks. We're on the same side, aren't we? Fu Rang froze for a second. Then, the meaning of my words seemed to click. A thick, honest grin spread across his handsome face. He bowed deeply as I turned toward the threshold of the great academy. As I stepped inside, I glanced back one last time. Seeing him standing there so loyally made my chest tighten with a sudden, sharp ache. It was currently the 25th year of the Hongwu era. In just 2 years, both Fu Rang and his father would be dead, executed right here in the palace. My grandfather was getting old. He was terrified that his young, inexperienced grandson wouldn't be able to control the powerful generals who built this empire. So he started cleaning house. First, it would be my late father's old allies, then my uncles, and eventually, anyone who looked like they might become a threat to the next emperor. Men like Fu Rang were destined to be collateral damage. But I was here now. I wouldn't let them die. Not only would I save them, but I would lead them to even greater glory. I shook the thoughts away and walked into the hall. Lu Sanwu, the Minister of Rites, was waiting for me. Standing beside him were 3 other scholars from the Hanlin Academy. Their names surfaced in my memory instantly. Next to Lu Sanwu stood Huang Zicheng, a short man with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Beside him was Chi Tai, a man with a long, flowing beard and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. And then there was the last one, dressed in simple cloth robes with a stern, unyielding expression. Feng Xiaoru. Grandfather had recently recalled him to court specifically to tutor the imperial grandsons. I suppressed a dry laugh. Here they were, the very men who would eventually goad the next emperor into a disastrous civil war. I had no intention of following their advice, but for now, I had a part to play. "Greetings, Scholar Lu," I said, bowing respectfully. The scholars returned the gesture with the formal etiquette of ministers. Out here, we were prince and subjects. Once we crossed into the classroom, we would be student and teachers. My grandfather might have started as a peasant, but he was obsessed with our education. He once hired the great scholar Song Lian to teach my father. Back then, Song Lian didn't care about royal titles. He used a wooden ruler to beat any prince who slacked off. My uncles used to complain to grandfather about the bruises, hoping for sympathy. Instead, grandfather would strip their pants off and give them a second beating himself. My uncle Zhu Di, the Prince of Yan, apparently got the worst of it because he was the most rebellious. His Highness the Prince of Wu is early today, Huang Zicheng said with a faint smile. I looked at the morning sun and smiled back. A day's plan starts in the morning. In the past, I was foolish. I wasted my time and disappointed my teachers. Now that I've realized how precious time is, I intend to catch up. I'm truly ashamed of my past behavior. To their absolute shock, I bent low in a deep, solemn bow. "Highness, please. This is too much," they cried out, stepping back. They couldn't believe this was the same boy. Lu Sanwu watched me with a mix of surprise and relief. To him, I looked the same, but my spirit had completely changed. I was poised, humble, and full of energy. It reminded him of my father when he was young. The old man's eyes grew misty. He truly believed I was a 1,000-mile horse of the Zhu family, a rare talent finally waking up. "Prince of Wu," Lu Sanwu said, stroking his beard. "This is Scholar Feng Xiaoru, who has just arrived in the capital." "I greet your highness," Feng Xiaoru said stiffly. "Please, Master Feng, there's no need for such formality," I said. "We aren't strangers, after all." The room went quiet. I continued with a smile. "Master Feng, you were a student of the great Song Lian. My father was also his student. By seniority, I should probably call you my senior brother." I gave him the bow of a junior disciple. A rare, thin smile actually touched Feng Xiaoru's rigid face. Looking at him, my heart felt heavy. Unlike Chi Tai and Huang Zicheng, who were mostly talk, Feng Xiaoru was a man of genuine principle. He came from a line of great scholars who believed in serving the people. He wasn't like the corrupt officials of later dynasties who spoke of virtue while acting like snakes. He was a man who lived by a code. In the history I knew, when my uncle Zhu Di eventually usurped the throne, he was told he had to get Feng Xiaoru to draft the inauguration decree. He was told that if Feng Xiaoru died, the seed of scholarship in China would die with him. Without Feng's approval, Zhu Di would always be seen as a common usurper. Zhu Di had begged him. He had pleaded. He even told Feng, "This is just a family matter. Please, just write the decree." But Feng Xiaoru had worn mourning clothes for the fallen emperor and stared his killer in the eye. He didn't write a decree. He wrote 4 words. "Death is death. The decree will not be written." When Zhu Di threatened to execute his entire family tree, all 9 branches of his relatives, Feng Xiaoru didn't flinch. He famously replied, "What does it matter if you kill 10 branches?" Zhu Di, possessing the famous family temper, did exactly that. He executed 10 branches of Fang's family right in front of him. Fang Xiaoru watched his relatives, his students, and his oldest friends die, one by one. He wept in silence, but the brush and paper sitting before him never moved. He refused to write a single word for the usurper. The executions lasted for 7 days. By the time they finally killed him, 847 people had been slaughtered. From a modern perspective, people might call him a fool. They would ask if his pride was worth 800 lives. But in this era, to a true scholar, it was worth everything. You could call it stupid, but you had to respect it. This was the spirit that had kept our civilization standing for thousands of years. It was the reason our heritage never broke, even when foreign invaders trampled our land. It was a backbone of pure integrity that lived in the blood of men like Wen Tianxiang and Lu Xiufu. It was the spirit of those who chose death over surrender. In an instant, 1,000 thoughts flashed through my mind. The slight contempt I had felt for these ancient Confucian scholars vanished. My expression turned solemn. I reached up, removed my prince's hat, and performed the most humble bow a student could give. To receive your teachings is my great fortune, I said, my voice steady. To be your disciple is my greatest honor. The Hanlin scholars were visibly moved. Lu Sanwu and Fang Xiaoru looked at me with genuine emotion. To them, I wasn't just a student. I was the most noble prince of Wu, the grandson of the emperor himself. Yet, I was telling them that in this room, there were no princes or subjects. There was only a teacher and his pupil. Fang Xiaoru stepped forward and helped me up. His face was stern, but his eyes were bright. Today, I accept the prince's respect. If you wish to learn, I will give everything I have to teach you. He then returned the bow with the formality of a loyal subject. The Prince of Wu is truly virtuous, Lu Sanwu whispered to himself. He seemed confused, wondering why I had been labeled as a lazy student in the past. He clearly suspected there was more to me than met the eye. Suddenly, the voices of Huang Ziqing and Chi Tai rang out from the doorway. They rushed to welcome a new arrival. It was my brother, Zhu Yunwen. The two scholars adored him. Unlike the cold, stiff faces they showed me, they were all smiles for him. I am just a student here, Zhu Yunwen said, waving off their formal greetings with practiced modesty. There is no Prince of Huai in this classroom, only Yunwen. He bowed to Lu Sanwu and then turned his attention to Fang Xiaoru. I caught the briefest flicker of shock in his eyes when he saw me. He definitely hadn't expected me to show up this early. He greeted Fang Xiaoru with perfect etiquette, clearly aware that he needed to win over the support of these influential scholars if he wanted to secure his future. The kid wasn't a fool. He knew that in a time of peace, the support of the court officials was just as important as the favor of the emperor. Second brother, I said, stepping forward to greet him. Zhu Yunwen looked at me and forced a smile. Third brother, you arrived even earlier than I did. The early bird gets the worm, I replied. We both shared a hollow laugh under the spring sun, two brothers playing a game where the stakes were life and death. Slowly, the classroom began to fill with the other boys of the Zhu family. My grandfather was a legend in many ways, but his productivity was truly unmatched. He had 26 sons who lived to adulthood, and the youngest ones were still here in the capital. These were my uncles, though many were years younger than me. I sat behind Zhu Yunwen. Behind me sat a row of rowdy kids who hadn't been sent to their fiefs yet. The Prince of Shun, the Prince of Tang, and the Prince of Yi were all around 10 years old. They were the definition of high-energy brats. As soon as Lu Sanwu turned his back, they started kicking my chair. Why haven't you come to play lately? The Prince of Shun whispered, leaning in close. My uncle sent me 2 fighting cocks. They're incredible. You should see the feathers fly when they get going. The Prince of Tang leaned in from the other side. I have 2 new hunting dogs. We can go catch rabbits whenever you want. Even the youngest, little Zhu Dong, who still had a runny nose, tugged on my sleeve. I have a telescope from the west, he said in a tiny, high-pitched voice. I'll give it to you, Brother Tong. Just don't be sad anymore. Please smile. I felt a sudden wave of warmth. I realized they weren't trying to be annoying. They knew I had just lost my father, and in their own childish way, they were trying to cheer me up. They were offering me their most prized possessions just to see me happy again. I looked back at their small, eager faces and nodded, feeling a genuine sense of belonging for the first time since I had arrived in this era. I turned back to face the front, my heart a little lighter, ready to face whatever lessons the Ming Dynasty had in store for me. I noticed Zhu Yunwen watching us. There was a strange look in his eyes, a mix of longing and envy. He saw how close the younger princes were getting to me. In the imperial family, true warmth is a rare currency. As the eldest son of the late crown prince, but born to a consort, he had always been treated with distant respect rather than affection. Silence, a voice boomed. Chi Tai, a scholar from the Hanlin Academy, stepped to the front of the room. He slammed his wooden ruler against the desk, and the chatter died instantly. "Your Highnesses, today we study the great learning," he announced, flipping his book open. "Repeat after me. The way of great learning lies in manifesting clear virtue, in loving the people." The room filled with the rhythmic chanting of young voices. I looked around at the kids bobbing their heads. They were reciting complex philosophy they could barely understand. It felt ridiculous. The younger princes should have been learning basic literacy, not diving into deep political theory. I tried to be a good student. I really did. But the Prince of Shun, sitting right next to me, started making faces. He wasn't making a sound, just mouthing words and wiggling his head like a maniac to get a rise out of me. I couldn't help it. I let out a small, stifled laugh. Bad move. Chi Tai's eyes snapped to mine. He had heard me. "Prince Wu," he said, his voice tight with irritation. "This morning you claimed you wanted to catch up on your studies. Is this how you show your sincerity?" He walked over, looming over my desk. "Tell me, do you even know what these words mean?" Every eye in the room turned toward me. Even the eunuchs at the door and the senior scholars in the back stopped what they were doing. If I failed this, I'd be the laughingstock of the palace. Luckily, I wasn't just some kid. Back in my world, my parents had pushed me hard, and I'd spent plenty of time studying the classics. I stood up calmly. "Master, the passage means that the purpose of higher learning is to promote noble character, to apply it to daily life, and to guide people toward perfection. Great learning here refers to the pursuit of vast knowledge." The silence that followed was heavy. The younger princes looked at me with pure awe. Zhu Yunwen's jaw practically hit the floor. Even the old scholars at the back were nodding in approval. Chi Tai's anger evaporated instantly, replaced by a wide, beaming smile. "Excellent. Prince Wu is absolutely correct." He began pacing, his hands behind his back. "From the individual to the state, virtue is the foundation. The previous Yuan dynasty fell because they ignored virtue. Their court was a mess, and the people suffered. I respected Chi Tai's knowledge, but he was a bit of a bookworm. He saw history through a narrow lens. As someone from the age of information, I knew better. The Mongol Empire didn't collapse just because they lacked virtue. It was simpler than that." Chi Tai noticed me frowning. "Does your Highness disagree?" I stood back up. "Master, you are right about virtue. But in my view, the Yuan dynasty fell for one reason: tyranny. As the ancients said, tyranny is fiercer than a tiger." Meanwhile, across the palace, my grandfather was buried under a mountain of scrolls. Zhu Yuanzhang was a man who knew everything that happened within his walls. "He woke up before dawn?" he asked, pausing his brush. The servant bowed low. "Yes, Your Majesty." When his guard asked why, the prince said he didn't dare be lazy while the blood of the emperor ran through his veins. My grandfather chuckled. A genuine, proud sound. "The brat has my discipline." The servant went on to describe my morning. I had washed with ice-cold water to stay sharp, just like my grandfather did on the battlefield. I had spent an hour doing strange, intense exercises to build muscle and killing intent in my movements. But what really stopped the emperor was the report of my breakfast. He ate 3 vegetable buns and a bowl of porridge. Just vegetables. The emperor slammed his desk. "Is the kitchen staff neglecting him?" "No, Majesty," the servant squeaked. He insisted. He said he is in mourning for the crown prince. He said he cannot observe the full 3 years of formal mourning, but he will abstain from meat to honor his father's memory. Grandfather went quiet. He threw the scroll aside and stood up. "That stubborn boy, he's just like his father." He brushed off the servants trying to bring a sedan chair. He never used those things. He was a man of the road and the saddle. Despite being in his 60s, he marched toward the study with the stride of a young general. He reached the doors just as my voice rang out from inside. Tyranny is fiercer than a tiger. He stopped, listening intently. The yuan fell because of their cruelty, I continued. They bled the people dry. They didn't care if we lived or died. When my family lived in Huaishi, the taxes and disasters left us with nothing. The government didn't help the victims. Instead, they raised taxes. People couldn't survive. Bandits rose up everywhere. When faced with rebel armies, the imperial court didn't try to negotiate or show mercy. They responded with slaughter. One city after another was butchered. With such tyranny, the people lost all hope. How could they not rebel? I looked around the room, my voice steady. I told them that while Master Qi mentioned a lack of virtue, that was only part of it. The Yuan dynasty suppressed the Han people. They divided us into northern and southern classes to keep us down. Whether it was the imperial exams or government positions, the path for southern Han people was blocked at every turn. People had no way to rise. Discrimination was everywhere. The officials were corrupt, caring nothing for the lives of the commoners. They only knew luxury and taxes. Land was concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite. The common people became refugees at the slightest hardship. These refugees joined the rebel armies, providing an endless supply of soldiers. The local powerful families turned their backs on the court. That is why the yuan collapsed. A country must give the people at the bottom a way to move up. It must maintain stability. It must ensure the people have food. It must build infrastructure, manage floods, and farm the land. A country needs a heart big enough to embrace the world. My grandfather once said that whether people are Mongol, Han, Miao, or Li, they are all subjects of the Ming. They should be treated as one. I spoke with confidence, but I noticed the people around me looking more and more shocked. These Hamlin scholars knew the history, but my perspective went beyond their books. They looked at the world as ministers, but I was speaking like a ruler. They remembered the slow-witted boy I used to be and couldn't believe the man standing before them. Outside the window, Feng Xiaoru was nodding repeatedly, his admiration clear. Lu Sanwu, the middle book drafter, stroked his long beard in deep thought. He was silently praising me. He knew that even the high-ranking ministers of the 6 departments might not have been able to summarize the situation so clearly under pressure. My insight was unique. My vision was long-term. Scholarship is one thing for a royal, but the talent and vision to rule is what truly matters. Lu Sanwu remembered my grandfather's words. Yunting is the 1,000-mile horse of our family. Hearing me now, he realized I was much more than that. He looked at me, then at the pensive Zhu Yunwen in the front row. His gaze shifted. Was the emperor planning to make me the imperial grandson? He was so lost in thought he didn't even notice the emperor standing right next to him. When he heard footsteps and turned, he saw my grandfather grinning, so wide his teeth showed. The brat. He's thought it through, grandfather whispered to himself. He's speaking right to my heart. As an emperor who came from the poorest background, he agreed with me completely. Virtue and etiquette were nonsense if the people were starving. If a country ignores the survival of its people, they will revolt. Grandfather leaned toward Lu Sanwa's ear and whispered, "Test him." Lu Sanwa nodded, but before he could speak, Feng Xiaoru stepped toward the window. He looked at me inside the classroom. "Prince Wu," Feng Xiaoru said, "you mentioned that most of the land was concentrated in the hands of a few. That is a sobering point. I agree. But throughout history, hasn't land always ended up in the hands of the few? Why does this happen?" Grandfather stayed quiet, listening. He was a farmer at heart, and land was his greatest concern. Even now in the Ming dynasty, the best land belonged to the powerful. The peasants worked all year and still went hungry under the weight of high rents. Feng Xiaoru waited, hoping for an answer that wasn't just a tired cliché. I thought for a moment. In my view, the problem of our nation has always been one thing: the land. Lu Sanwu and Feng Xiaoru traded a look of pure shock. It was a realization that usually took a lifetime of studying history to reach. I had said it without hesitation. I continued. Since the first emperor unified the world, every dynasty started strong and ended weak. Why? Because at the start of a dynasty, the population is low due to war. Land is redistributed. There are many independent farmers. But as the country finds peace, land annexation begins. The powerful and the wealthy accumulate land because they have the money. This leaves the commoners with nothing to plant. I paced the room. In times of peace, the population grows. If an old man has 20 acres, he can feed 3 sons. But when those 3 sons inherit, they only get 7 acres each. Can they feed 3 sons of their own? The landless peasants become tenants for the rich. Generation after generation, they become little more than slaves to the great landlords. I looked at the scholars. When a disaster strikes or the state needs to raise taxes for war, these tenants become a hidden population. Those who can't pay their taxes sell their land for cheap to the big families just to escape the government's reach. A farmer in this era has no defense against risk. One bad harvest or one troop movement makes them destitute. To survive, they must give up their land. The room was silent as I dropped the final truth. Population growth leads to land annexation. Land annexation leads to financial collapse and social chaos. In the Yuan dynasty, the land belonged to officials, landlords, and temples. They didn't pay taxes. The burden fell entirely on the small farmers. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and the national strength withered. It's a cycle. No dynasty has ever escaped it. Outside the window, everyone was frowning in deep thought. They were all men who had lived through chaotic times. They understood land, but they had never heard the cause of the collapse explained this way. My grandfather was thinking about something else. If there are too many people and not enough land, the people have no way to live. He was once one of those people. He didn't want his empire to follow that same path to the grave. I finished speaking and realized the entire place had gone dead quiet. The other princes and grandsons stared at me with wide, admiring eyes. They didn't really understand the complexities of land reform, but they knew I sounded impressive. The Hamlin scholars, however, were silent. They leaned back, lost in deep thought, their faces unreadable. I felt a sharp gaze drilling into me. I turned and saw Zhu Yunwen watching me with a look full of suspicion and doubt. I didn't back down. I flashed him a wide, toothy grin. He immediately looked away, his expression souring. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed from outside the window. Then tell me, how do we handle this land annexation? Everyone in the room froze. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, Imperial Grandfather. No need for formalities, Zhu Yuanzhang said, stepping into the room and stopping anyone from bowing. He looked directly at me. Old Third, answer me. My heart skipped a beat. He had been standing there the whole time. He heard everything. I knew this was a turning point. If I botched this answer, my standing in his eyes would crumble. I took a breath and gathered my thoughts. Grandfather, I heard you've ordered a census to count the population in every province and county. Population growth drives land annexation, but we can use the population to fight it. We need to find the hidden people, the ones the powerful local families are hiding in their estates to avoid taxes. We bring them out and turn them into independent farmers. I gestured to the open window. The Ming dynasty is like the rising sun. We have vast amounts of unclaimed land. Instead of letting local bullies seize it, we should give it to the people. Zhu Yuanzhang frowned, thinking it over. Do you think those big families will just let their workers go? Even as the emperor, he knew he couldn't just wave a wand and make the world follow his heart. He hated the corrupt local officials as much as anyone, but they were a stubborn rot. Please forgive my reckless words, grandfather, I said softly. We're just family talking, he said, his face hardening into a serious mask. Say whatever is on your mind. Right now, the Ming dynasty collects a poll tax, I continued. I had spent the last few days studying our tax system. It was the same as every dynasty before us. If you were born, you owed the government money. It sounded simple, but it was brutal. Poor families would keep their sons but drown their infant daughters just to avoid the tax burden. I looked him in the eye. What if we stopped taxing people and started taxing land instead? King of Wu, watch your words. Fang Xiaoru shouted, forgetting for a moment that the emperor was standing right there. Reforming the tax system was the fastest way to make enemies of the entire elite class. He had grown fond of me as a student and didn't want to see me become the most hated man in the empire. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at me, his gaze heavy. I saw encouragement there, but also worry and a strange kind of sadness. He was telling me to think before I spoke, not to silence me, but to protect me from the backlash. Grandfather, I am your legitimate grandson. I said, my voice ringing out clearly. I won't let the fear of criticism turn me into a coward. Zhu Yuanzhang burst into a loud, booming laugh. Good. Speak your mind. I think we should tax based on acreage, I explained. 1 acre, 1 coin. The more land you own, the more you pay. If we abolish the poll tax that the poor can't afford, they'll want to own their own land again. And if a rich man owns 10,000 acres, he pays 10,000 coins. It strengthens the state, and it makes people think twice before hoarding land just to avoid taxes. The room went silent again as they chewed on the idea. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at me with pure joy. A small idea, he chuckled. This small idea is something not a single official in my court has the guts to say. For that courage alone, you are truly my grandson. He leaned in with a playful glint in his eyes. Since you have one idea, do you happen to have a second? I do, I said. I stood tall, my voice firm. When the country runs out of land to distribute, we strike out. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The scholars turned pale. The younger princes looked like they wanted to cheer. Outside, Zhu Yuanzhang's eyes were dancing with appreciation. I've read some rare books, I said, smiling at my grandfather. They say that to the south, in places like Annam, Siam, and Kampa, it is spring all year round. The land is vast, the people are few, and they can harvest rice 3 times a year. The rivers are full of fish, and fruit grows wild on the trees. People there don't even have to farm to stay full. I paused, letting that sink in. And the Ryukyu kingdom that brought tribute today? Their land is perfect for sugarcane. Right now, our military is strong. Why not take those places and slowly move our people there? Prince, a nation that loves war will surely perish. One scholar cried out. Our central plains are blessed by heaven. Why would we want those barbarian lands? Another added. Be careful of such talk. Remember the fall of the Sui dynasty. The people will never leave their ancestral homes. You'll spark a rebellion. To the Hanlon scholars, my words sounded like the ramblings of a warmonger. They saw it as a waste of money and lives. Even Zhu Yunwen couldn't stay quiet. He stepped forward with the air of an older brother correcting a child. Third brother, stop this nonsense. Our imperial grandfather personally designated those countries as not to be conquered. I looked at Yunwen, the man who would eventually lose an army of 50,000 to his own uncle, and felt a flash of pity. Grandfather said that to put those nations at ease while our foundation was still shaky, I replied calmly. But our population is growing. Every year we have more mouths to feed and more prisoners to manage. Instead of letting them starve, why not give them weapons and send them to those lands? We don't even need the imperial army. In a few decades, after we've pushed our language and writing onto them, those lands will be ours. I was thinking of the British Empire back in my world. They had turned distant islands into their own territory. Besides, I added, being a county is better than being a vassal state. If they admire our culture so much, why keep them separate? Make them part of the empire. If we're worried about control, we can infect our own princes there. Prince of Wu, Lu Sanwu was so angry his hair practically stood on end. He stormed into the room. A great nation rules through virtue, not the sword. We cannot simply attack our neighbors. What would the world think of the emperor if these words got out? Enough, enough, Zhu Yuanzhang said, waving his hand from the window. He was smiling. It's just a child's rambling. Why get so worked up? But then his smile vanished. He scanned the room with a gaze that could freeze blood. Not a single word of what the Prince of Wu said today is to leave this room. Do you understand? We obey your command, the scholars shouted, bowing low. They thought the emperor was protecting me from my own shameful ideas. They didn't realize that Zhu Yuanzhang actually agreed with me. He was a man of the sword. He knew that truth was often found at the edge of a blade. If he had listened to scholars his whole life, he'd still be a peasant in a field instead of an emperor on a throne. He hadn't marked those countries as not to be conquered out of kindness. He did it because he couldn't afford to reach them yet. If he could build an empire where the sun never set, he would do it in a heartbeat. The classroom fell into a deathly silence. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at the sky and then back at us. Continue your studies, he said, then turned and walked away. Just as I reached the door, I paused and turned back. Old 21, I said, looking at my young uncle, the Prince of Shun. You're eating lunch with me and Grandpa today? Don't forget. I obey the command, the boy chirped, grinning. I stepped out into the sunlight. Behind me, the emperor had already disappeared into the distance. Inside the classroom, the atmosphere remained heavy. Lu Sanwu leaned toward Feng Xiaoru, his voice hushed, but thick with worry. The Prince of Wu is incredibly bright, Lu Sanwu whispered. His insights on state affairs are unique, but he has a dangerous obsession with steel and soldiers. We must watch him closely. We can't let him lead the empire down a path of ruin. Feng Xiaoru nodded grimly. The emperor's affection for him is obvious. If the throne really passes to the Prince of Wu, what kind of country will we become under a ruler who loves conquest? While the scholars fretted, my grandfather was walking back to his palace with a very different set of thoughts. The shock I'd given him hadn't worn off. He saw past the violence the scholars feared. He saw a vision for the future of the Ming dynasty, a path to eternal stability that no previous dynasty had ever dared to walk. He was a peasant emperor. He knew the value of land. He knew the high-quality rice strains we planted in the Central Plains had originally come from those small southern kingdoms. If we seized land that could yield 3 harvests a year, his people would never starve again. And my idea of using soft power, sending prisoners, landless peasants, and criminals to build military settlements instead of wasting a massive army, it was brilliant. But there was one problem: officials. Most scholars would rather die than serve in a barbaric wasteland like Yunnan or Guangxi. Suddenly, Grandpa stopped walking. A slow smile spread across his face. Why kill corrupt officials when he could use them? He didn't need to waste a good executioner. He could just ship the greedy bastards off to the borders to civilize the locals and guard the cities. It was the ultimate recycling program. He actually laughed out loud. The guards behind him exchanged nervous glances. Since the crown prince had passed away, the emperor hadn't smiled once. In fact, they hadn't seen him this genuinely happy in years. Back in the classroom, the morning session ended. The scholars assigned our homework and dismissed us. The afternoon was reserved for what the young princes actually enjoyed: horse riding, archery, and wrestling. Grandpa didn't want his descendants to become weak, pampered scholars with useless limbs. As soon as the teachers left, the younger princes swarmed me. My uncle, Zhu Mo, the Prince of Shun, had eyes like saucers. Tengji, he chirped, using the familiar term for an older brother. Is that southern land really as good as you said? 3 harvests a year? You can just sit around and never starve. The other little princes leaned in, hungry for details. A new idea started forming in my head. Grandpa's original plan was to station his sons at the borders to protect the empire. Brothers in battle, father and son in the field. It was a noble sentiment. But I knew history. Eventually, those princes would become nothing but parasitic imperial pigs, locked in their fiefdoms, eating the commoners' taxes and contributing nothing. By the end of the Ming dynasty, the wealth of a single prince could feed an army of 100,000 for a year while the peasants ate bark. If I was going to rule, I couldn't have these relatives sucking the country dry. I needed to send them further away. It's all true, I said, lowering my voice. I read it in the secret records. The people there live in grass huts and don't even work. They wake up, kick a tree, and fruit falls into their laps. They eat until they're full, then go back to sleep. Don't they turn into pigs then? The Prince of Tang asked, puzzled. They can't just eat fruit, the Prince of Ing added. Where's the meat? They don't eat much meat, I said, gesturing to my chest. And they're tiny. They only grow up to here. The little princes burst out laughing. I leaned in closer, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. But it's not just food. Those lands are overflowing with rhino horns, ivory, pearls, and gemstones. And gold. Mountains of gold. The boys stopped laughing. Their eyes went wide. But they don't know how to use any of it. I continued, leading them right where I wanted them. Doesn't it seem like a waste to leave all that gold in their hands? If only it were ours, Zhu Mo muttered. Would they just give it to us? The youngest, the Prince of Tang, asked skeptically. I grinned. Why would they have to give it to us? We take it. The young princes fell into a deep, thoughtful silence. I let the temptation sink in. We have the blades, I whispered. We have the soldiers. To not take it is a waste. Think about my grandfather, your father. What was he when he was young? He was a monk. He was a beggar. Grandpa loved telling us about his bitter past to keep us humble. He'd made his sons walk to their ancestral home in straw sandals, forbidden from accepting gifts from local officials. He wanted them to know how hard it was to win the world. Our family came from the mud, I told them, poisoning their young minds with ambition. We didn't inherit this empire. Our fathers took it from the Mongols with the edge of a sword. They fought, they bled, and they snatched wealth and titles out of the fire. The little princes started nodding. They were at the age where they were bored out of their minds in the palace, itching for excitement. Uncle 21, I said, looking at Zhuo. Don't you always say you envy Grandpa for the days he spent charging into battle? Do you want to be a carefree prince who spends his life watching cockfights? Or do you want to be a great general on a warhorse? Zhuo puffed out his chest. A great general. Every time my uncle tells me stories about charging with the vanguard, I wish I could grab a sword and join him right then. I clapped him on the shoulder. Exactly. Those barbarians are sitting on our gold and our land. Doesn't it make you feel uneasy? When you grow up, take 10,000 men and just go get it. Expand the Ming borders. Imagine how glorious that would be. Zhuo's eyes were practically glowing. He was probably already imagining himself galloping through the jungle, planting the Ming flag in the dirt. I'll take it all, Zhuo shouted. I'll take my uncle, my cousins, and my in-laws. We'll go take everything from those barbarians. I have an uncle too, the Prince of Tang yelled, his face flushed. He's up north killing Mongols right now. I'm going to write to him and tell him to come back and help me. Who doesn't have an uncle? The Prince of Ing chimed in. Mine is a decorated count. He has thousands of soldiers under his command. I watched the younger princes. Their eyes were bright, their minds like blank sheets of paper. I had just planted a seed in their hearts, and I knew it was already starting to grow. Suddenly, a deliberate cough sounded from outside the classroom window. We all turned. It was Huang Goer, my grandfather's personal eunuch. He knelt on the ground, a respectful smile on his face. Greetings to the princes, he said, then looked directly at me. Prince Wu, His Majesty requests your presence for dinner. I nodded. As I stood up to leave, I felt the weight of the other prince's envious stares. In the front row, Zhu Yunwen lowered his head, looking utterly dejected. In the past, the honor of dining with Grandpa was reserved only for him, the eldest grandson. Now, he looked out the window with a hollow expression. I knew what he was thinking. Grandpa, have you forgotten about me? I followed Huang Goer to the Palace of Heavenly Grace. No need for formalities, Grandpa said, smiling warmly. It's just the two of us. Sit. I helped him into his chair before taking my own. I looked at the table and blinked. It was unexpected. Grandpa was one of the most frugal emperors in history. Usually, he ate one simple dish with rice, usually salted pork fried with garlic and leeks. It was a peasant's meal, heavy on salt and oil. He loved it so much he never left a single grain of rice on his plate. I remembered hearing about my 19th uncle, the Prince of Gu. He once secretly threw away some old rice and salted pork. Grandpa found out and whipped him 10 times, screaming that he was a disgrace who didn't understand the hardships of the common people. But tonight, the table was a feast. There was braised fish, sea cucumber with scallions, salted duck, and a fat roasted chicken. It smelled incredible. The cook wasn't some master chef. He was an old army cook named Sue who had followed Grandpa for 30 years. What are you waiting for? Eat. Grandpa was clearly in high spirits. There was even a pot of warm wine. I stood up and poured him a cup. Grandpa, we can't possibly finish all of this. If we can't finish it, I'll give it to the guards, Grandpa laughed. Eat. Eat more. I hesitated, looking at the meat. You brat, Grandpa cursed playfully. Are you ignoring my words? I told you to stop that vegetarian nonsense. You're growing. When I was your age, I could eat 3 of these chickens in one sitting. You'll ruin your health. A man needs meat. He tore a drumstick off the chicken and dropped it onto my plate. Then, without any imperial dignity, he wiped his greasy hands on his robes. Eat. Thank you, Grandpa, I said. I had started this journey just trying to please him, but the old man's genuine affection hit me hard. For a moment, he wasn't the iron-fisted emperor. He was just a grandfather. He reminded me so much of my grandfather from my past life that my eyes blurred. I wiped a tear away and started eating the chicken like a starving man. That's more like it, Grandpa said. He raised his cup. You're getting older. Have a drink with me. I took a small sip. Grandpa sighed, looking at me intently. If you hadn't been playing the fool all these years, we could have done this a long time ago. He paused. Tell me, those things you said in the classroom today, did you come up with those yourself? Every word was my own, Grandpa, I replied. A pillar of the state, Grandpa whispered, smiling. Then his face turned serious. But do you know how many people you offended with those words? I smiled back. With you here, who do I have to fear? Besides, I am the Emperor's legitimate grandson. Why should I care what they think? Grandpa nodded, satisfied. That's my grandson. He took another sip of wine, acting casual. But Yunting, what you suggested, changing the taxes, taking land from the fiefdoms, those are incredibly difficult. Even for an emperor, they are hard to implement. His eyes suddenly turned sharp as lightning. They locked onto mine. If, and I mean if, you were the emperor, what would you do? How would you convince the ministers? My heart skipped a beat. This was it. He was testing me as a potential heir. I stood up and bowed deeply. I believe an emperor without a spirit of expansion is no better than a house dog, I said firmly. Grandpa's eyes flashed. The emperor leads the world, I continued. The ministers are just there to help. They only block reforms when their own pockets are threatened. But the emperor does not belong to the ministers. He belongs to the people. You always said the emperor must uphold justice for the commoners. I wouldn't need to convince the ministers. I would only need them to obey. Grandpa drained his cup. And if you leave behind a bad reputation? If history calls you a tyrant? The people know the truth, I said. If I were emperor, I wouldn't care about being a gatekeeper praised by officials. I would rather be a great emperor loved by the millions. Good, Grandpa roared with laughter. Just then, Huang Goer rushed in, holding a frantic report. Your Majesty, an urgent message from Yunnan. Muing has. Grandpa bolted upright. What happened to Muing? I had never seen him so shaken. In that moment, he wasn't a ruler. He was a terrified father figure. Muing was his first adopted son. He had been a starving orphan taken in by Grandpa and Empress Ma. He had fought by Grandpa's side since he was 12. He was more than a general. He was family. Even the biological princes called him Big Brother. When Grandpa took the throne, he made his adopted sons take back their original surnames. But Muing had begged to stay as Zhu. Eventually, he chose the name Mu, meaning to bathe in imperial grace. He had spent his life guarding the borders in Yunnan, crushing the remnants of the Mongols and the Dali clans. He was the shield of the Ming dynasty. Grandpa's hands trembled as he reached for the scroll. The atmosphere in the room turned ice cold. Muing was more than just a general. In Yunnan, he was a saint. He built irrigation systems, opened trade routes, and established schools. He wasn't arrogant, greedy, or cruel. Grandpa used to say that with Muing guarding the border, he could sleep soundly. Years ago, when Empress Ma passed away, Muing had been so devastated in Yunnan that he coughed up blood and fell bedridden for months. The Mu family would go on to guard that border for centuries, their blood soaking the soil to keep the Ming dynasty safe. They stayed loyal until the very last head of their house died in battle in Myanmar generations later. But right now, the news from Yunnan was a nightmare. Grandpa snatched the report from Huang Goer's hands so fast it tore. I watched his fingers tremble. His face twisted into a mask of pure agony. Pass my decree, Grandpa roared. Send the imperial physicians to Yunnan immediately. Every medicine we have in the capital, everything, send it all. If Muing needs it, he gets it. Grandpa, I said, stepping forward to steady him. What happened? Grandpa sank into his chair and let out a long, hollow sigh. Muing, he's fading. I felt a jolt of shock. I took the report and read it. It was written by Mu Chun, Mu Ying's eldest son. He wrote that when his father heard the news of Crown Prince Zhu Biao's death, he wailed until he spat blood 3 times. He hadn't left his bed since. The doctors said his days were numbered. Mu Ying's final wish was to be buried outside the East Mausoleum, so he could stay near the Empress and guard her even in death. Memories flashed through my mind. I remembered being a young child when Mu Ying last visited the capital. My father, Zhu Biao, had introduced us. Mu Ying was a massive man with a warm, gentle smile. My father called him brothering. I had bowed to him as a nephew, and he had treated me with such kindness, gifting me a beautiful curved dagger from the borderlands. When he left the capital, my father and the other princes had walked with him for miles, weeping as they said goodbye at the edge of Xuanwu Lake. First my eldest son, and now Mu Ying, Grandpa whispered, his voice cracking with bitterness. Why? Why must I, an old man with white hair, keep burying my children? He swept the dishes off the table in a fit of grief. Everyone is leaving me. How am I supposed to live? I knelt beside him and gently rubbed his back. People in history books called Zhu Yuanzhang a tyrant, but my memories told a different story. He was a man who valued family above all else. He and Empress Ma had raised their adopted orphans right alongside their biological sons. The Empress taught them to read. Grandpa taught them to fight. They were a pack of wolves, and Mu Ying had been the best of them. Grandpa, don't lose hope, I said softly. General Mu is only sick. He's in his prime and has a warrior's constitution. He's just grieving. With rest, he'll recover. Grandpa just sighed. Sitting there, his white hair and deep wrinkles made him look incredibly fragile. He was an emperor, yes, but he was a man from the mud who loved his family fiercely. He had executed countless officials, but he had never touched a member of his own family. Even the nephew who betrayed him was only stripped of status, and that nephew's descendants were still treated as royalty. He treated his nephews and adopted sons like his own blood. I remembered how Empress Ma used to make new clothes for all the adopted sons' children every new year. Grandpa, I continued, I want to ask you for a favor. We're family, Yunting. You don't need to ask, he said, sounding exhausted. I forced a smile. Your birthday is coming up in a few months. In a normal family, a grandfather's birthday is a time for everyone to gather. I was thinking, let's make it a real celebration this year. Grandpa looked up, a spark of interest in his eyes. Call all my uncles back to the capital, I suggested. Bring the adopted sons too. Let's all be together for a few days. You can finally see all your grandsons, your granddaughters, and your extended family. Wouldn't that be wonderful? For a moment, the wrinkles on Grandpa's face smoothed out as he smiled. He looked genuinely longing for that kind of warmth. An emperor is the most powerful man on earth, but he is also the loneliest. The palace was massive, but it wasn't a home. It was just him, his concubines, and endless, stiff rituals. But then, the smile faded. He shook his head. No, we can't do that. He sighed again. The princes coming to the capital is a massive undertaking. With their families and guards, we're talking tens of thousands of people. Every local government along the way would have to provide for them. The provinces aren't wealthy right now. It's a nice thought, but I can't let my personal joy become a burden to the common people. I won't make them suffer just so I can have a party. I felt a surge of genuine respect. This was a true ruler. He wasn't like the emperors of later dynasties who spent fortunes on gardens and tours while the people starved. He actually cared about the budget and the bread on a peasant's table. But I wasn't giving up. I realized then that I needed to find a way to get some money. Even an emperor gets stressed about the bill. Grandpa had even forbidden the princes from attending his own future funeral just to save the provinces from the expense. Grandson, remember this, Grandpa said, seeing me deep in thought. An emperor is supported by the world and can have anything he wants. But an emperor must never be greedy. I stood straight and listened. An emperor exists to decide for the people and make their lives better, he continued. Not to be a plague upon them. Do you know what the greatest power of an emperor is? I didn't answer immediately. I had a lot to think about. If I wanted to pull this off, I needed a plan that didn't touch the state treasury. Grandpa didn't tolerate any nonsense, so I had to be careful. As I walked away, I started tallying my resources. My two maternal uncles controlled the capital's elite garrison, 30,000 veteran troops. My granduncle Lan Yu was a great general, though he only had a few hundred house guards in the city. There were others too, like Fu Yud and Feng Sheng. I had the military support. Now, I just needed the gold. You could really see my grandfather's mastery of power here. The old generals who followed him were all fierce warriors, but they were loyal to him and him alone. They held the swords, but they didn't hold the purse strings or the political authority unless Grandpa gave the word. My father, Zhu Biao, had left behind a massive political inheritance. There were top-tier generals in the capital and commanders stationed all over the empire who would have followed him to the ends of the earth. But while these men were great at killing enemies, using them for complex political maneuvering was a recipe for disaster. Then there were the civil officials. Just thinking about them gave me a headache. It had only been a few years since the Great Purge of Hu Weiyong's faction. Every official with real power was terrified of being accused of forming cliques. If Grandpa officially named me the heir, they would fall in line. But until that crown was actually on my head, they wouldn't dare take a side. I had to laugh at myself. As the newly minted Prince of Wu, I had no money and no personal staff. I was sitting on a mountain of potential power, but I couldn't touch a cent of it yet. I made my way back toward the Eastern Palace. Behind the main hall was a quiet little courtyard that served as my living quarters. As I approached, I saw two guards directing a group of eunuchs who were hauling crates and boxes inside. The guards were the Liao brothers, the same ones who had given me that kind warning at my father's funeral. "Greetings, Your Highness," the brothers shouted, dropping to their knees. "Please, get up," I said, reaching out to help them. They were just palace guards, but they represented the Duke of Chu's lineage. I couldn't afford to be cold to them. I gestured to the mountain of gift boxes. "What's all this?" "Your Highness, these are tributes from the regional princes for the Dragon Boat Festival," Liao Yong explained respectfully. "His Majesty specifically ordered us to deliver them to you." The Dragon Boat Festival. It was a major tradition, but with my father's recent passing, the palace hadn't exactly been in a celebrating mood. "Thank you for the hard work, brothers," I said with a smile. I picked up one of the boxes. It was from Zhu Chun, the Prince of Shu. The seal read, 100 units of smoked meat. Grandpa lived a simple life, so his sons didn't dare send anything too flashy. They sent bacon and local specialties. But then a thought hit me. These goods were sent via the imperial courier system using fast horses and government stations. The cost of shipping this meat probably cost 10 times what the meat itself was worth. Wait, my mind started racing. I saw a path. A way to make the country rich. The courier system. I chatted with the Liao brothers for a few more minutes before wandering into the garden alone. My head was spinning with this sudden spark of inspiration. In all those time travel novels I'd read, the protagonists always got rich by selling matches or soap. That was total nonsense. The palace already had matches that were basically the same as modern ones. Soap? Even middle-class families used it. And distilled spirits? The Ming dynasty had strict laws against using grain for alcohol when people were starving. Making booze was a good way to lose your head. Even glass already existed. The palace windows were full of colored glaze. But the courier system was different. Grandpa obsessed over communication. Every official report was carried by the postal network. These stations also handled traveling officials. It was basically an early version of the National Post Office. The problem was that the Ming postal system didn't make a dime. It was a massive drain on the treasury. If I could take the concept of a modern logistics network and overlay it onto the existing infrastructure, I could create a massive revenue stream for the empire. If it worked, the issue of princes traveling to the capital for birthdays would be solved, and my standing in Grandpa's heart would skyrocket. I got more excited the more I thought about it. I turned to my attendants. "I need to write something. Do not disturb me." Far to the north, the spring breeze arrived late. While the south was already blooming, the green was only just starting to crawl up the hillsides here. In a forest of white pear blossoms, a blade flashed. The light of the steel didn't ruin the beauty of the flowers. It added a sense of iron and blood to the scene. A burly man moved through the trees, swinging a long saber. His silk robe was embroidered with dragon patterns that danced in the wind. He was built like a leopard, radiating power and aggression. His eyes were sharp, his beard thick. He moved faster. The sound of the blade went from a faint whistle to a roar, then finally to a crack like thunder. With one final strike, he drove the blade into the dirt. As he turned, a pear tree behind him silently slid apart, severed perfectly in two. Clap, clap, clap. A thin monk with piercing eyes and black robes walked into the clearing. The Prince of Yan's blade work is becoming more refined by the day. Zhu Di, the Prince of Yan and fourth son of the Emperor, gave a proud smile. It's a small trick, useless on a battlefield, but good for the bones. This was Beiping, the gateway to the Ming Empire. Zhu Di was the king here. My grandfather once said that among all his sons, the Prince of Yin was the most courageous. That was why he had been given the task of guarding the northern frontier. For centuries, this land had been lost to northern invaders. It was a place of national shame until the Ming army marched north and reclaimed it. Now, it was renamed Beiping, Northern Peace. Under Zhu Di's command, the finest border troops in the world kept that peace. Zhu Di walked through the forest with the monk, his old friend Dao Yin, also known as Yao Guangxiao. Guangxiao, Zhu Di said, plucking a pear blossom. Any news from the capital? Yao Guangxiao smiled thinly. The same as before. His Majesty has named Zhu Yunwen the Prince of Huai, and Zhu Yunting the Prince of Wu. He paused. It seems we all misjudged that third grandson. The one who stayed out of the spotlight has suddenly become the emperor's favorite. Prince of Wu, Zhu Di repeated, a cold smile playing on his lips. The old man really does dote on him. He looked south, toward the capital. His gaze was icy and deep. His brother, the crown prince, was gone. The opportunity he had been waiting for was finally here. Zhu Di laughed. He knew his chance had arrived. Every son of a dragon dreams of becoming a dragon themselves. Zhu Di was no different. On horseback, he led armies. Off his horse, he governed the people. His military and political talents stood head and shoulders above his brothers. Why shouldn't he sit on that throne? Before, his eldest brother Zhu Biao was alive. Back then, he had to bury these thoughts deep in his heart. But now, his brother was gone. The idea of taking that seat was like a wildfire he couldn't put out. He was born with a natural arrogance, a refusal to lose, and an unyielding spirit. As a teenager, he joined the army under General Su De. He charged into enemy lines and never once shamed the Zhu family name. Since reaching adulthood, he had ruled the borderlands. Whether it was the remnants of the northern Yuan or the smaller kingdoms like Goryeo, everyone avoided his sharp edge. In all of Ming, who was more fit for the throne? If I were the emperor, I would sweep across the north with a long blade. If I were the emperor, my military and civil power would make 10,000 nations pay tribute. If I were the emperor, I would turn centuries of weakness into ancient history. The men under my command are tigers and wolves. Zhu Di pulled his gaze back from the south. His face was cold. No news from the capital meant the old man was still hesitating about who to name as the heir. Maybe he's hesitating, Yao Guangxiao said with a thin smile. Or maybe he's already chosen, but he isn't ready to say it yet. Do you think the old man would choose me? Zhu Di asked seriously. Yao Guangxiao shook his head. Prince of Yin, you are the fourth son. You have older brothers above you. By blood or by rank, it doesn't fall to you. Zhu Di snorted. He crushed a pear blossom in his hand until it was nothing but pulp. They aren't stronger than me. He narrowed his eyes. If it's not me, and it can't be my older brothers, then who? The grandsons, Yao Guangxiao whispered. To keep the balance between the princes, His Majesty will choose a grandson. He will name an imperial grandson as the heir. A brat on the throne? Zhu Di snapped, his anger rising. Based on what? When I was campaigning in the northern deserts, the princes of Wu and Huai were still drinking their mother's milk. It's about balance, Yao Guangxiao repeated. If the throne goes to one of the sons, neither you, nor the Prince of Qin, nor the Prince of Jin would be satisfied. The emperor worries that after he passes, the princes will raise their armies and tear each other apart. A grandson won't be able to control us either, Zhu Di sneered. Except for my eldest brother, we don't submit to anyone. But there is legitimacy, Yao Guangxiao said firmly. If the son of the crown prince succeeds, he has the moral high ground of the sovereign. The princes of Qin and Jin wouldn't dare face the condemnation of the world by challenging the center. I would dare, Zhu Di countered, his voice cold. Then we wait, Yao Guangxiao smiled. We wait for the right moment. He stepped forward, looking Zhu Di in the eye. His Majesty hates nothing more than people challenging his authority. Even though you are his favorite, you cannot jump out now. The emperor is waiting for someone to show their hand. Zhu Di fell silent. Yao Guangxiao was right. He knew his father too well. The old man's authority was absolute. His choices were final. He was an emperor first and a father second. In the face of the empire's future, family ties came last. How long do we wait? Zhu Di asked, his eyes burning with frustration. Until the new emperor ascends, Yao Guangxiao said, his gaze falling on the scattered petals. A new emperor will not tolerate powerful princes who hold massive armies. No ruler would allow his uncles to command legions of tigers and wolves. The grandson is young. Young people are impatient. They want to prove themselves. They want recognition. Attacking their uncles will seem like the best way to establish authority. Yao Guangxiao smiled wider. When the new emperor can't hold back and moves against the princes, that is when the Prince of Yan's time begins. Zhu Di let out a hearty laugh. Fine. We wait. We continue to wait. He waved his hand and started walking out of the forest. Double the money for our people in the capital. Set up more eyes and ears. Recruit more officials. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, he vaulted onto his horse. A heavy bough appeared in his hand. Boys, follow me, Zhu Di shouted. We're hunting today. I want a black bear for dinner. His guards roared in response, following him like a pack of wolves. Early the next morning, as the sun began to rise, my grandfather, Zhu Yuanzhang, was already at his desk. He was staring at a mountain of petitions. He reached for the first one and realized it was from me, Zhu Yunting, the Prince of Wu. The title of my proposal was, Increasing Revenue for the Ming Empire. Grandfather let out a small laugh. This brat has a big mouth. The larger an empire gets, the harder it is to manage. The wealth gap grows, and the Ming was still recovering from the wars at the end of the Yuan dynasty. The people were poor, and the state was poor. All the ministers were racking their brains trying to figure out how to fix the budget, especially with the constant military costs in the north. Even the veteran officials didn't dare talk about increasing revenue. Yet here I was, a brat, claiming I could do it. Grandfather opened the scroll with a smile and began to read. I had written about the courier stations. The Ming had over 11,500 of them used for delivering official documents and hosting traveling officials. Each station had staff, horses, weapons, and livestock. The state spent over 2 million taels of silver every year just to keep them running. Grandfather nodded slowly. At least I knew the facts. Early in his reign, he had decreed these stations were for government use only. But I argued that the situation was different in different regions. In the north, they were vital for war. But in the south, where there was peace, the government was spending a fortune on stations that were barely used to their full potential. My proposal was simple. The south was booming with trade. If we opened the courier stations for commercial use, delivering private letters for citizens, providing lodging for merchants, and offering storage for goods, the government could collect over 1 million taels in fees every year. Grandfather's expression turned serious. He wasn't a ruler raised on stiff Confucian textbooks. He didn't look down on merchants as much as the scholars did. He knew that a golden age couldn't be built on farming alone. People needed to work, and they needed to trade. However, he still had his prejudices. In the wealthy South, big business was controlled by powerful families and corrupt officials who were experts at dodging taxes. The government always had a headache trying to collect revenue from them. Grandfather put down the scroll and shouted toward the door. Someone. I am here. Huang Goer, the eunuch, appeared instantly. Summon Lu Sanwu, the Minister of Revenue Fu Yuan, and the Minister of Personnel Zhan Hui. Now, being a minister under a hard-working emperor was a nightmare. Grandfather woke up before dawn to read reports, which meant his ministers had to wake up even earlier. A short while later, the ministers arrived at the Fengtian Hall. They looked nervous, their eyes darting toward the high stacks of scrolls on the emperor's desk. They didn't know why they had been called so early. We pay our respects to your majesty. May you live for 10,000. Enough, grandfather interrupted, though he was smiling. I hear that 10,000 years talk so much my ears have calluses. Who can actually live that long? It's nonsense. His good mood was obvious. He stepped out from behind the scrolls. Grandfather handed the scroll to the eunuch, gesturing for him to show it to the ministers. He wanted them to see it. He wanted to hear what they had to say. Lu Sanwu took it first, followed by Fu Yuan and Zhan Hui. As they read, their expressions shifted into something strange. These men were the pillars of the Ming dynasty. They understood the logic behind the words immediately, but they also saw the risks. To them, parts of it felt like the naive fantasies of a dreamer. Your Majesty, Lu Sanwu said, breaking the silence. I must ask, who wrote this? Grandfather had intentionally torn off the page with my name on it. He just smiled. Don't worry about who wrote it. Just give me your thoughts. Lou Sanwa hesitated for a moment. I believe this is a grave mistake. The postal stations were established by the court to handle matters of state and military importance. How can we open them to commoners? If we mix the officials with the public, trouble will follow. He wasn't just talking to hear himself speak. The stations were for official documents and hosting government travelers. If commoners started sending letters and packages through the same system, a single lost document could ruin a national campaign. The risk, in his eyes, far outweighed the reward. Grandfather turned his gaze toward the Minister of Revenue. Fuyuan, what about you? Fuyuan looked at the scroll again and actually smiled. I think there are several points here worth considering. Oh, Grandfather prompted. Tell me. Fuyuan pointed to a section written in plain, straightforward language. This part right here. The state maintains the horses, the staff, and the buildings. We provide food for every passing official. When the stations are busy, it's fine. But many of them sit empty, wasting government funds and grain for nothing. If we open them to the public and charge a fee, the stations could stop being a drain on the treasury. They might even turn a profit. So you're saying, Grandfather asked, that opening them up would bring in actual revenue? Without a doubt, Fu Yuan replied. The Ministry of Revenue spends a fortune every year just to keep these places running. In the 24th year of Hongwu, we spent over 1.6 million taels of silver just on the stations south of the Yangtze. And that doesn't even count the supplies. Plus, local officials always take their cut. Very little of that money actually reaches the stations anyway. Grandfather's voice dropped, becoming light and dangerous. Is that so? Cold sweat broke out on the ministers' foreheads. Everywhere there were officials, there was greed. But my grandfather was a man who specialized in hunting the greedy. Since he took the throne, countless officials had lost their heads over silver. He had even ordered some to be flayed alive as a warning to the rest. Whenever he mentioned taking a cut, it usually meant someone was about to die. But grandfather didn't push it further. He turned to the Minister of Personnel. Zhang Hui, your turn. Zhang Hui was a slick old fox. I believe there are both pros and cons, Your Majesty. I wouldn't dare presume to make a final judgment. It was a classic non-answer. Grandfather looked exhausted. Being the emperor was a lonely job. His ministers were so afraid of responsibility that they wanted him to decide everything. He sighed quietly, but didn't lose his temper. Instead, he looked at the eunuch, Huang Goer. Go and fetch the king of Wu, he ordered. The ministers exchanged confused looks. What did this have to do with me? The scroll was written by my grandson, Grandfather said, his voice carrying a hint of pride. Since he wrote it, I'll let him explain it. The ministers were stunned. They had assumed the proposal came from a veteran official who understood the inner workings of the empire. They never expected it to be the work of a young prince. Zhang Hui's mind started racing. He had been promoted by my late father, the crown prince, and he usually stayed close to the family. He stole a glance at the imperial desk and steeled his nerves. Your Majesty, Zhang Hui said quickly, now that I think about it, there are actually many brilliant points in this proposal. While they were debating my future, I was at the Great Academy. The scholars hadn't arrived for the morning lessons yet. I was surrounded by a group of my young uncles, the little princes who were technically my seniors, but much younger in age. They were staring at me like I was some kind of hero. In my past life, I loved to talk. In this life, the palace was a dangerous, suffocating place where every word had to be measured. Talking to these kids was the only way I could stay sane. Do you guys know about Chuanzhou Port? I asked. Their eyes lit up. I told them about the ancient port in Fujian, a place where people from all over the world gathered. I described the foreigners, men with red hair and green eyes, tall noses and hairy arms. The little princes gasped in shock. Are there others? One asked. Plenty, I said. There are people who are pure black, from head to toe. How black? Prince Zhu Jing asked, leaning in. Let's put it this way, I joked. If you turn off the lights, all you can see are their teeth. They let out another collective shout of wonder. A loud, intentional cough came from the front of the room. It was my cousin, Zhu Yunwen. He was clutching a book, looking at us with a face full of disapproval. He thought that as royal descendants, We shouldn't be laughing and joking like commoners in a classroom. But the little princes didn't give him the time of day. They were the emperor's own sons. They didn't care about a nephew who acted like a stiff old man. In another timeline, Yunwen would eventually treat these uncles poorly, but for now, they just saw him as a killjoy. Yunwen coughed again, louder this time. Are you sick? Prince Zhu Imo snapped, losing his patience. If you're sick, go find a royal doctor. He turned to the door and shouted, Hey, where's everyone? Didn't you hear the Prince of Huai coughing? Get in here. A group of eunuchs rushed in, bowing and scraping around Yunwen, asking if he needed medicine. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Ignore him, Tong, Zhu Imo said, turning back to me with a grin. Tell us more. Where do these red-haired people come from? From thousands of miles away, I said. They come by ship. The world is much bigger than just the Ming dynasty. To the far west, there are many kingdoms. How long does it take to get here? By boat. A year or two, I replied. The youngest prince, the Prince of Ing, piped up in a high-pitched voice. That's so far. It'll be hard to go there and rob them, won't it? I laughed. You don't rob them with horses, little uncle. You use ships. War isn't just fought on land. Remember how grandfather defeated Chen Yuliang on the water to win the empire? We were right in the middle of the story when a voice interrupted from the doorway. His Royal Highness, the King of Wu. His Majesty requests your presence. I turned around. It was Huang Goer, grandfather's personal eunuch. I stood up and gave him a polite smile. Thank you, eunuch, I said. Do you know what grandfather wants to see me about? Even though eunuchs in the Ming dynasty didn't have much status, they were still the people closest to the emperor. You had to show them a little respect. Huang Goer leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. Third young master, it's about that report you submitted. I understood immediately. My proposal had reached grandfather's desk. I let the servant straighten my robes, and then followed the eunuch toward Feng'an Palace. Tung, come back soon and finish the story. Prince Zhu Imo shouted after me. Inside the schoolroom, the other princes and grandsons watched me leave. Their faces were a mix of envy, jealousy, and indifference. The younger ones didn't care much. Zhu Imo slumped back onto his stool, looking bored. Man, Tung is going to see father again, Zhu Imo muttered, his voice dropping. He's got guts. My heart starts pounding the second I see father. My legs turned to jelly. Prince Zhuing added, leaning in. I can't even lift my head, another said. The youngest prince, who hadn't even been given a title yet, spoke up in a tiny, squeaky voice. I peed my pants once. As I walked, I didn't think about their fear. I was busy calculating. Turning the imperial postal system into a public service was a massive project. It involved logistics, infrastructure, and most importantly, money. Anything involving money got complicated fast. Grandfather would likely ask two things. How do we collect the fees? And how do we make sure that money actually reaches the treasury instead of lining a corrupt official's pockets? The emperor hated corrupt officials more than anything. To convince him, I needed a foolproof system. I walked fast. Before I knew it, I was at the palace doors. But as I stepped inside, I froze. The hall wasn't empty. Over a dozen high-ranking officials in crimson robes stood there. The heads of all 6 ministries were present, along with top judges and court officials. On the jade throne, grandfather watched me walk in. He had a smile on his face. It's funny how old people are. Once they decide they like a grandchild, everything that kid does looks perfect. I could almost see his thoughts. This kid walks just like I did when I was young, full of energy. I shook off my surprise and walked to the center of the hall. Grandson pays his respects to imperial grandfather. Technically, in a formal setting like this, I should have referred to myself as your servant. But I did it on purpose. If I spoke as a servant, I had to be careful. If I spoke as a grandson, a few mistakes wouldn't matter. Grandfather chuckled. Get up. Come here. I walked up to the edge of his jade desk. Did you practice your martial arts this morning? He asked. Yes, grandfather. I ran through my forms, then had a bowl of porridge, 6 buns, and an egg. Good. Eating well is important, he said warmly. At your age, you need it. When I was your age, I felt like I could eat an entire cow in one sitting. The ministers watched us, their hearts racing. When had the emperor ever been this easygoing? When had he ever been this close to a grandson? Right now, he didn't look like a terrifying tyrant. He looked like an ordinary grandfather chatting with his kin. Then there was my title, King of Wu, and the fact that I was the eldest son of the late crown prince. The ministers weren't fools. The throne was empty, and the emperor hadn't picked a son to fill it. Instead, he was showering me with favor. The East Palace faction, the old supporters of my father, were practically vibrating with joy. "Do you know why I called you here?" Grandfather asked. "I do," I said loudly. "It's about my proposal to turn the postal stations into a public service to increase the empire's revenue." Grandfather nodded, clearly impressed. Most princes would be shaking in their boots in front of this crowd, but I stood tall. My voice was steady. To be a leader, you need more than just brains and guts. You need presence. "He's here now," Grandfather said to the ministers, smiling. "If you have questions, ask him." I turned to face the crowd. The real test was starting. The first to speak was Liu Sanwu, a senior scholar. "Your Highness, the postal stations were built for the state. They carry urgent military and government news. If we open them to the public, won't we lose sight of what's important? What if military secrets are leaked? What if official documents are lost in the clutter? Besides, these stations are for officials. Letting commoners use them, it blurs the lines between high and low status." His concerns were classic conservative thinking. In this era, the postal system was the government's only way to know what was happening across the vast empire. And status was everything. You couldn't just let a peasant use the same service as a high official. I thought for a moment and smiled. The stations carry state secrets. The people just want to send letters and trinkets. We just keep them separate. I stepped down into the crowd of ministers to speak more directly. Let's take our capital, Nanjing, as an example. There are over 100,000 merchants and students living here away from home. That's not even counting the laborers. The Minister of Revenue, Fu Yuan, nodded. That matched their records. Up on the throne, Grandfather looked pleased. He realized I'd done my homework. "A stranger in a strange land," I quoted softly. "On every holiday, they miss their families. These people send a massive amount of letters and goods home every year. It's a huge volume." The ministers nodded. It was true. "But this stuff isn't like a military emergency," I continued. "You can't use war horses to deliver a letter from a student to his mom." The Minister of Personnel, Zhang Hui, chimed in. "So your Highness means we should separate the logistics?" "Exactly," I said, giving him an appreciative look. "Our postal stations don't just have war horses. They have plenty of mules and donkeys. These animals are meant to carry officials' luggage, but most of the time, they're just standing around. Why let them eat free grain? Let's put them to work." I paced through the hall. "The stations have workers and guards who are often idle too. Let's use Nanjing as the hub. We set specific days for public mail. We use the mules and carts to move the goods to the next station under guard. The guards prevent theft, and the station masters check the inventory to prevent fraud. Once the goods arrive, the station posts a notice for the recipient to pick them up, or a worker delivers it for a small fee." I looked around at their faces. The sender pays, the recipient receives, and the government profits. Who loses? "You can't expect people to deliver things for free," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. "Why wouldn't they give a little tip?" In this era, a letter from home was worth 10,000 pieces of gold. There were no phones, no internet. A single letter was a lifeline, a treasure that couldn't be measured in currency. When I said this, the ministers in the hall couldn't help but smile. Even Grandfather, sitting high on his throne, let out a small chuckle. This was the way of the people. If someone helped you, you didn't let them leave empty-handed. It wasn't corruption and it wasn't extortion. It was the simple, honest gratitude of the common folk. Exactly the kind of spirit Grandfather loved. The ministers finally caught on. We would keep the elite war horses for urgent military matters. But the idle carts, the mules, and the extra staff, we'd put them to work for the people. Several officials nodded in approval. If this worked, communication across the empire would become incredibly fast and convenient. But Scholar Liu Sanwu still looked skeptical. He was worried about social hierarchy, about commoners and officials mixing in the same spaces. "Let's take the Beiping station in Tongzhou as an example," I said, thinking on my feet. "It covers 45 acres and can house 1,000 people. Even with officials staying there, we have plenty of empty rooms. If we keep the sections separate, the hierarchy remains intact. Besides, the only commoners who could afford to stay there would be merchant caravans. Regular people just want a safe place to sleep, out of the wind and rain. They aren't looking for luxury. I paused, letting that sink in. And let's be honest, merchants are stingy. Only the owners and managers will pay for a room. The laborers will still sleep outside with the goods. That brings me to the second function. The stations will provide food, lodging, and secure storage for traders. I smiled. And that is a completely different price tag than a simple letter. These officials were sharp. As soon as I mentioned money, their eyes lit up. Fu Yuan, the Minister of Revenue, stepped forward. Your Highness, it's not impossible, he admitted. Providing convenience for travelers is a mercy from the throne. But you mentioned opening a new source of revenue. How exactly do we collect the money? I suppressed a sigh. He just wants to know how to get paid. It's simple, I said. I walked over to the throne. Grandfather, would you be so bold as to write a few words for me? Grandfather had been listening intently, lost in thought. He looked at me and smiled. What should I write? I pulled a small piece of stiff paper, about the size of a cigarette box, from my sleeve. Please write the word post. Fine, he grunted. He picked up his cinnabar brush. To my modern eyes, his handwriting wasn't exactly beautiful, but every stroke was bold and powerful. It carried the weight of a man who had conquered an empire. Now, please write stamp, I added. He did as I asked, filling several small cards with his calligraphy. He set the brush down, looking at me with amusement. I turned to the crowd, holding up the card. Look at this. This is grandfather's imperial calligraphy. We can stick this onto a letter to prove the postage has been paid. I looked back at the emperor. Grandfather, since you wrote it, let's call it a postage stamp. Grandfather froze for a second, then burst into a hearty laugh. Good. We'll call it a postage stamp. Congratulations, Your Majesty. Zhang Hui, the Minister of Personnel, shouted immediately. If this is issued to the world, it will be a story for the ages. I congratulate Your Majesty, I congratulate the Prince of Wu, and I congratulate the Ming Dynasty. The rest of the ministers scrambled to join in, piling on the flattery. Usually, grandfather hated suck-ups, but today he was grinning from ear to ear. Every emperor wants their name to live forever. This stamp was the key. As long as people wrote letters, they would remember the name Zhu Yuanzhang. They would remember the former cowherd who founded the Great Ming. Once the cheering died down, Lu Sanwu spoke up again. Your Highness, how much will these stamps cost? This will be the fee for the people, grandfather said, holding up the world's first Ming stamp. The government sells them, the people stick them on their letters, we cancel them with a seal, and off they go. Lu Sanwu pondered. But how much? Not much, I said. 2 copper coins. Grandfather laughed. Don't look down on 2 coins. There are hundreds of thousands of letters moving through Ming every day. It adds up. The finance ministers gasped. They ran the numbers in their heads instantly. 10,000 stamps was 20,000 coins. 100,000 stamps was 200,000. Converted to silver, that was over 2,000 taels a day. A top-tier county only collected about 30,000 taels of tax in an entire year. However, I said with a mischievous grin, you can't buy a stamp with grandfather's actual handwriting for just 2 coins. That would be at least 20 taels of silver. Grandfather, the world is full of rich people who would die to own a piece of your writing just to put it on an altar. You rascal, grandfather laughed loudly. You're even doing business on my head now. I turned to Lu Sanwu. And since you are a leader among scholars, a stamp based on your calligraphy should sell for at least 5 taels. Every student in the empire would want a masterpiece from a Hamlin scholar. Lu Sanwu looked smug, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of eternal fame. I wasn't finished. Beyond postage stamps, we will have freight stamps for goods, lodging stamps for rooms, and meal stamps for food. The government issues them, the people use them, and all the revenue flows directly to the central treasury. The workers get paid, the stations are maintained, and the surplus fills the coffers. Everyone wins. I stood beside grandfather, looking at the crowd. So why wouldn't we do this? The hall went silent. Some ministers whispered, others closed their eyes to calculate, but no one could find a flaw. Transforming the postal stations into a national logistics network was a brilliant move. It was a service to the people, a boost for trade, and a massive financial windfall for the state. We were talking about millions of taels in annual revenue, the equivalent of the taxes from 5 entire provinces. And unlike farm taxes, this revenue didn't depend on the weather. Zhang Hui was the first to bow. Your Majesty, I believe the Prince of Wu's proposal is feasible. I agree, said the Minister of Revenue. I agree, said the Chief of the Court of Revision. One by one, the heads of the military and the bureaucracy fell in line. Finally, Liu Sanwu, the head of the civil officials, spoke. I also agree. However, governing a great nation is like cooking a small fish. You must be careful. This reform is massive. We need to plan the details thoroughly. Scholar Liu is right, I said, giving him his due respect. I am only offering the idea. The execution and the details rely on all of you. I only have a bit of cleverness. The actual governance of the country depends on your wisdom. The ministers bowed low, their voices filled with genuine respect. Grandfather looked at me, standing tall by his side, and I could see the pride shining in his eyes. Grandfather looked at me, and I could see the satisfaction written all over his face. He knew I was holding back, showing just enough talent to be useful without being arrogant. I knew my strengths and my weaknesses. I knew when to push and when to let the ministers handle the details. That was the mark of a true ruler, setting the grand vision and letting the subordinates fill in the blanks. To him, I was proving to be more capable than my father had been at my age. He stood up from the jade throne, a wide smile breaking through his stern expression. Tunger, he called out. Starting tomorrow, after your morning studies, you will go to the cabinet office. You'll sit with the ministers and discuss how to reform the postal stations, how to implement it, how to enforce it, and how to make it last. His face suddenly turned serious. Since we are opening these stations to the public, we must have strict rules. Do you understand? I understand, grandfather, I replied. You're worried that a good policy will turn into a tool for local officials to line their pockets. You're worried the couriers won't take it seriously, leading to lost mail and shaming the imperial court. Grandfather laughed, his eyes bright. Exactly. You're a quick study. Remember, this is for the people. Don't mess it up, or the whole world will curse our family behind our backs. Your servant obeys, I said, beginning to kneel. Grandfather caught me and pulled me back up. None of that servant talk between us. You've done a great service today. You found a way to fill the treasury and ease my burdens. He turned to the crowd of ministers, his voice booming. Tunger, tell me, what do you want? I'll give you whatever you ask for. The ministers watched us, stunned. The way the emperor looked at me, the way he spoke, it was clear he was grooming me as his heir. The old officials from the Eastern Palace looked like they were about to burst into tears of joy. I smiled. I do have one request, grandfather. Speak, he said with a wave of his hand. I knelt again, looking up at him. I asked that for your birthday in October, you allow the vassal kings, my uncles, to return to the capital to celebrate with you. The hall went silent. Grandfather froze. Family reunions are the greatest joy in life, I said clearly. You are the emperor, the father of many sons, yet not one of them is here to serve you. I see you working from dawn until dusk, always alone. It hurts my heart. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of the words. I know you weren't avoiding a reunion because you didn't want to see them. You were worried about the cost to the local treasuries. But now that I've found a new source of income, I beg you, let my uncles come home to celebrate your birthday. Grandfather was visibly moved. He had offered me anything, and I hadn't asked for gold or power. I only asked for him to see his children. I've already done the math, I continued. If my uncles don't bring massive entourages, the cost will be minimal. The Ministry of Revenue can even advance the funds. I glanced at the Minister of Revenue and winked. And if the minister finds it difficult, I'll pay for it myself. Where would you get that kind of money? Grandfather asked, amused. I'm the Prince of Wu now, I joked. Even if I haven't gone to my fief, my annual salary is 10,000 taels. I'll just prepay 10 years of my salary to cover my uncle's travel expenses. Anyway, I'm staying here with you, so I have nowhere else to spend it. Might as well spend it on family. Grandfather burst into laughter, his heart full of pride. He had conquered the world, But he felt that even the greatest emperors of history didn't have a grandson as filial and talented as mine. The prince is truly virtuous. The ministers shouted, bowing in unison. We congratulate your majesty. We congratulate the Ming dynasty. Zhang Hui, the minister of personnel, was the first to support the idea. He saw the brilliance in my move. By bringing the vassal kings back, I wasn't just being a good grandson. I was earning their gratitude and establishing my moral authority over them. I was the one who brought them home. Grandfather held my hand, his eyes misting over. He had lost his son, but it felt like heaven had gifted him a grandson to make up for the pain. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps shattered the moment. A guard rushed in, holding a document sealed with the emergency military stamp. He knelt, breathless. Report. An emergency message from the border. In an instant, the kindly grandfather vanished. The old lion of the battlefield returned. His eyes turned sharp as daggers. Bring it here. I stepped down the stairs, took the scroll from the guard, and handed it to my grandfather. He read it and let out a cold, harsh laugh. Grandfather? What is it? I asked. The Northern Yuan commander, Yesuan Timur, is leading an army across the border, he said, looking up with a fierce grin. This old tiger took a nap, and now the rats think they can kick me in the face. He turned to his eunuch. Summon the generals to the hall immediately, and bring a chair for the Prince of Wu. He sits right next to me. The drums began to beat. Deep, rhythmic thuds echoed through the forbidden city. These were the same war drums grandfather had used when he first fought to claim the empire. The Northern Yuan had been driven out of the Central Plains years ago, but they were still out there in the grasslands, watching us like hungry wolves. They thought the Ming was weak because we were in mourning. They were wrong. The war drums continued to thunder from the walls of the forbidden city. They were calling for the generals, the men who had fought across every corner of the empire. The sound vibrated through the air, thick with the scent of impending slaughter. Sitting there next to grandfather, my blood began to boil. I couldn't stay seated. I stood up, my heart racing in sync with the rhythmic thuds. It sounded like a dragon's roar that refused to fade. Near grandfather's desk, an old blade rested on a rack. It was the same weapon that had followed him through decades of war. Under the force of the drums, the sword began to tremble in its scabbard. It seemed desperate to break free and show its edge to the world once more. Outside the Hall of Supreme Harmony, rows of guards stood like iron statues. Their eyes were sharp, their backs straight. I knew that with a single word from the emperor, they would spring onto their horses and gallop to the ends of the earth. This was the true spirit of a founding dynasty. I looked at grandfather. He was stroking his sword, a faint smile playing on his lips. He caught me staring. Boy, he said, his voice deep and steady. I'm going to teach you how to fight a war. The drums stopped. A heavy silence filled the hall as the ministers lined up. Then, the sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps approached from outside. Gray-haired generals, clad in iron armor and carrying long swords, marched into the hall with their heads held high. One by one, they knelt. Fu Yud, Feng Sheng, and the commanders of the Tiger and Dragon Guards. The titles echoed through the chamber. Marquis of Jingchuan, Marquis of Dingyuan, Marquis of Hezhou. These were legends of 100 battles. They knelt before the old lion on the throne, their voices like thunder. Gung Bingwen, Li Jinglong, Gua Ying, Shen Baixing. The names kept coming. Long live the emperor. Long live, long live. Their collective roar shook the very foundations of the palace. I scanned their faces. Many were old, their hair white as snow, yet they stood with an aura that could crush the world. There was Gua Ying, who started as grandfather's personal bodyguard. There was Gung Bingwen, a master of defense. And there were the younger ones, men who had grown up in camps, witnessing the rise of the Ming through fire and blood. These men were the backbone of the empire. They were the reason grandfather dared to send armies into the northern wastes. As I watched them, they watched me. The older lords, like Feng Sheng, were visibly stunned to see me sitting right next to the emperor. They quickly lowered their heads in respect. But one man stood there, staring at me with a blank, almost foolish expression. I recognized him instantly from my memories. I almost laughed out loud. It was Li Jinglong, the man history would remember as the greatest loser of all time. In the future, He would lead 500,000 men only to be chased like a dog by Zhu Di. He was the ultimate inside man, the one who would eventually open the city gates for the enemy. I gave him a slight nod. Li Jinglong immediately broke into a wide, mindless grin. He looked the part of a hero, tall, handsome, and dignified, but he was an empty shell. We were technically cousins. Grandfather had always treated Li Jinglong's family with insane levels of generosity because Li's father, Li Wenzhong, was grandfather's favorite nephew. Grandfather had even killed every doctor who failed to save Li Wenzhong when he fell ill. Now, that love had transferred to this useless son. The hall grew crowded as more generals arrived. The air was thick with the smell of iron and leather. Then, the sons of the great Su De entered, Su Huzu and Su Xingshou. I looked at Su Xingshou. He looked loyal enough, but I knew he was secretly Zhu Di's best friend. He would eventually die by a sword for his betrayal. Finally, I saw 3 familiar faces and stood up straight. The sons of Chang Yechen walked in, Chang Sheng and Chang's son. My uncles had arrived. Right behind them was the fierce Lan Yu, my granduncle. They paused when they saw me sitting by the throne, their eyes widening in shock. Then, they took their places, unable to hide the proud smirks on their faces. The room was full. Grandfather leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. The tiger-like generals leaned in, waiting for his command. "Someone is looking for trouble," Grandfather said. He spoke lightly, almost playfully, like a mob boss telling his family that someone had insulted them. It was mocking, arrogant, and utterly dominant. A faint snicker broke the silence in the hall. It was a cold, dismissive sound. Then, another general joined in. The old men with missing teeth began to chuckle. The younger generals started to laugh out loud. Within seconds, the quiet sneers turned into a roar of mocking laughter that filled the entire palace. None of them feared the threat. They were just waiting for the order to crush it. The men in the Feng'an Palace laughed as if they had just heard the most ridiculous joke in history. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was wild, unrestrained, and bold. The sound of their voices shook the very air, vibrating against the iron armor of the generals and rattling the ceremonial blades resting on the jade tables. Even the golden dragons carved into the ceiling seemed to tremble. Up on the dragon throne, Grandfather laughed too. He rested his chin on his hands, looking caught between amusement and a fierce, internal joy. The roar of laughter spilled out of the hall and echoed through the deep corridors of the imperial city. Outside, the guards in their silk uniforms and the soldiers in heavy plate caught the infection. They didn't make a sound, but their faces stretched into wide, predatory grins. Their eyes weren't filled with humor. They were filled with sharp intent, heat, blood, and a craving for war. I was the only one not laughing. Standing beside Grandfather, I looked at the founding emperor of the Ming dynasty and his fearless generals. I looked at the young soldiers outside, ready to march at a moment's notice. A surge of adrenaline hit me so hard I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them, I am here. I have arrived in this magnificent era. I was witnessing the raw, unfiltered spirit of the men who had built this empire from nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the real Ming dynasty. This was the legacy I was meant to inherit. It was an honor just to be in this room, to know these men. I realized then that I had to protect this era. I had to ensure this country kept this arrogant, unstoppable backbone forever. For centuries, since the end of the Tang dynasty, the Central Plains had been humiliated. The Khitans, the Jurchens, the Mongols, they had all taken turns crushing us. The nomadic tribes on their fast horses and curved blades used to laugh at the softness of the men in the heartland. But these soft men, these former farmers and peasants, had used a suicidal bravery and a refusal to die to carve out a dynasty that stood second to none. At that moment, I finally understood what my identity meant. I understood what that throne represented and what the future required of me. "Laugh all you want," Grandfather shouted, standing up. He stroked his beard with one hand, his eyes dancing. "I told you someone was looking for trouble, didn't I?" The generals laughed even harder. Some of them were clutching their sides, tears streaming down their weathered faces. But then, slowly, the laughter died down. Grandfather's expression went cold. A chilling, predatory stillness settled over him. The Oirat Taiji, Izan Timur has led 60,000 troops across our borders, grandfather said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous sneer. They burned our signal fires. They slaughtered 362 of our border guards. They murdered 1,796 of our civilians. Bang! Grandfather slammed his hand onto the table, his hair practically bristling with fury. Old friends, my sons, who wants to take the lead and cut those bastards to pieces? I am willing to go. The shout from the generals was like a tidal wave, a thunderous roar that shook the earth. Caught up in the fervor, I couldn't help myself. I knelt down with the rest of them, my blood boiling. The generals all puffed out their chests, their eyes pleading for the command. Your Majesty, I may be old, but I can still fight. Duke Fuyad shouted. Give me 80,000. No, 50,000 men. I'll use those bastards' heads to repair the Great Wall. Your Majesty, I haven't fought in years, Marquis Guoying added. My old bones need to move. I've followed you for decades. I don't want to die in a bed at home. Let me die at the border. The cries for war were endless. It wasn't just a love for combat. It was a fanatical devotion to protecting their home. Grandfather scanned the room, his gaze eventually landing on me. I was still kneeling, my face flushed with excitement. Tunger, what are you joining in for? Grandfather asked with a chuckle. I looked up, my voice steady and determined. Grandfather, I don't know much about war yet, but I have strength. As your grandson, I should shed my blood on the battlefield for the Ming. I beg for your permission to go with the army. I don't need to be a general. I'm willing to go as a common soldier. Grandfather laughed happily, looking at his ministers with pure pride. Do you see this? My grandson, that fearless streak, he takes after me. He pulled me up and patted my arm, leaning in to whisper, don't be silly. If I sent the Prince of Wu to the front lines, what would I need them for? My expectations for you are much higher than that. The room went silent. The general's eyes widened. They weren't fools. They knew the emperor didn't make idle comments. I saw my granduncle Lan Yu and the Chang brothers exchange looks of pure joy. Let me ask you, grandfather said, catching me off guard. Of all these famous generals in my Ming dynasty, who do you think I should send? This was a trap. If I picked one, I'd offend the rest. I looked at the sea of expectant faces and took a deep breath. Grandfather, do you really want my opinion? I asked. I'm the emperor, he replied. I don't speak just to hear my own voice. I smiled at the generals. If it were up to me, I'd say we should give the younger generation more opportunities. I let out a confident laugh. Our veteran generals are the pillars of the state. Sending them to kill a few nameless rebels is like using a butcher's cleaver to kill a chicken. A few ripples of laughter broke out. Even grandfather grinned. The veterans have the heart to serve, but the border is cold and harsh, I continued. Instead of making them charge the front lines for months on end, they should stay in the capital to oversee the big picture and give us their wisdom. If I had to choose, I would pick General Lan Yu to lead. Let him take the younger officers out to see the world. Let those Oirat thieves act as a whetstone to sharpen grandfather's blades. Grandfather nodded repeatedly, his respect for me clearly growing. He saw that I wasn't just thinking about one battle. I was thinking about training the next generation of military talent. The old tigers were still strong, but they were aging. Their sons hadn't been tested by fire yet. A soldier who hasn't been to war isn't a soldier, and a general who hasn't led a campaign isn't a general. Lan Yu, grandfather called out. The Prince of Wu says you should go. So go. Lan Yu stepped forward from the ranks, his head held high. I will not decline, your majesty. He looked around the hall, radiating arrogance. He had earned it. With the older generation fading, he was the one who had repeatedly crushed the Northern Yuan. Your Majesty's birthday is approaching. I will bring you the heads of those thieves as a gift. Good. It's you then, grandfather said. He stood up and signaled for the decree to be announced. Everyone in the hall knelt. Lan Yu is appointed Grand General of the North. He will take 45,000 men from the elite divisions. He will also have authority over the border garrisons. Grandfather looked Lan Yu in the eye. I'll tell the Prince of Qin to follow your lead. You can use his troops. Remember, since they dared to come, don't let a single one of them return alive. I obey, Lan Yu shouted. He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye and gave a small, knowing smile. I gave my granduncle a slight nod in return. The wheels of war were turning. Grandfather wasn't finished. Before the army set out, he announced that I, the Prince of Wu, would accompany him to inspect the three armies. He wanted me to help boost the morale of the troops. I bowed low, my heart racing with excitement. I thanked him for his immense grace. I could feel it. Grandfather was starting to believe in me, not just as a grandson, but as a military leader. He was intentionally shaping my image, molding me into a ruler who understood the sword. As I straightened up, my eyes caught the golden dragon throne. I knew I was one step closer to sitting on it. Right now, the Ming dynasty held a crushing strategic advantage over the northern Yuan. They didn't dare launch a full-scale invasion. This recent border raid was likely a desperate attempt to break our economic blockade. We weren't just squeezing them with steel. We were starving them of salt, tea, sugar, iron, and cloth. Their cavalry was still massive, but their quality of life was plummeting every year. After the court session ended, Lan Yu returned to his estate. It didn't take long for the generals of the Huaishi faction to gather there. Lan Yu ordered a feast of fine wine and rich food. These men were warriors. When they got together, they usually only talked about gambling, drinking, and killing. But today, the conversation shifted. Chao Zhen, the Marquis of Jingchuan, raised his glass. Brother Lan, do you think the old man is finally showing his hand regarding the Prince of Wu? Showing his hand? Zhang Yi, the Marquis of Hushou, laughed. The old man might as well have shouted it from the rooftops. He's treating the Prince of Wu like the heir apparent. The room erupted in laughter. When my father, the Crown Prince, was alive, these men were his strongest supporters. After he died, they felt lost and unprotected. But now, I was the legitimate son of the late prince and the grandson of the legendary General Chang Yechen. I was one of them. My bloodline was pure, far superior to my half-brother Zhu Yunwen. These men didn't just hope I'd take the throne. They were willing to roll up their sleeves and fight for it. History showed that grandfather eventually slaughtered them all because they wouldn't submit to Zhu Yunwen. But with me, it was different. Lan Yu gripped his wine cup, a grin spreading across his face. Who else could the old man pick? He's the legitimate son and the grandson of my brother-in-law, Chang Yechen. Only the third prince can make us veterans follow orders. We all served under General Chang. We all owe the late crown prince our lives. If he doesn't pick our boy, who else would we even respect? The generals nodded aggressively. They were simple men who valued blood and loyalty over abstract logic. They recognized me as their own. Lan Yu's expression turned serious, and he signaled for them to lower their voices. Keep your mouths shut outside these walls. Until the old man officially speaks, nothing is set. We can't give anyone a reason to attack him. But remember, we protect the Prince of Wu at all costs. Our future wealth and status depend on him. As they roared their agreement, Lan Yu took a slow sip of wine, his eyes narrowing. He was thinking of one man he had always warned my father about, the Prince of Yan, Zhu Di. Suddenly, a steward entered. He was a former soldier who had served under Lan Yu until a leg injury forced him off his horse. General, the second young master is here. Lan Yu was confused. The second young master was his nephew, Chang Sheng, the son of Chang Yechen. Tell him to come in and drink. He says he has private business, the steward whispered. Lan Yu left the rowdy generals and went to the side hall. Chang Sheng was waiting there, looking every bit the warrior his father had been. Uncle, he said urgently. What's with all the secrecy? Lan Yu asked. He cared for the Chang brothers more than his own sons. Chang Sheng leaned in and handed him a letter. From him, he whispered, gesturing a 3 with his fingers. Even in Lan Yu's own home, they had to be careful. Grandfather's Jinyui spies were everywhere. Lan Yu dismissed the servants and opened the letter. To my uncle Lan Yu, the letter began. I had written it with the tone of a respectful junior, which made Lan Yu smile. But as he read, his expression shifted. I told him that grandfather's birthday was approaching and this campaign had to be perfect. I warned him that many in court were jealous of his achievements. I told him clearly, do not split the captured gold and silver among the officers. If he captured noble women from the northern Yuan, he had to bring them back safely and untouched. I told him he was seen as arrogant and defiant, and he needed to be careful not to give anyone ammunition to use against him. Lan Yu watched the letter burn in the fireplace after he finished reading. What did he say? Changsheng asked. Lan Yu laughed softly, though his eyes were thoughtful. The kid told me to watch my step. He's telling me not to give people a reason to hang me. He's grown up, Changsheng. He's starting to worry about his elders. Back at my own courtyard, I stared up at the night sky. I knew how grandfather operated. He didn't kill people because he was angry. He killed them because they were obstacles. In the original timeline, once Zhu Yunwen was named heir, Lan Yu's crimes were tallied up overnight. Private distribution of spoils, forming factions, and even raping a northern Yuan empress. He had even threatened to wash a border pass in blood because they didn't open the gates fast enough for him. Grandfather only tolerated Lan Yu because of his relationship with my father. I had said what needed to be said. I wanted the throne, but I didn't want a general who couldn't be controlled. If grandfather thought I couldn't handle Lan Yu, he would kill him just to clear the path for me. A subject must act like a subject. My warning was a way to save him, but also a test. The next morning, the East Palace was buzzing with activity. The spring breeze shook the trees, making the leaves rustle like laughter. Inside, Zhu Yunwen stood nervously by his mother, Lady Liu. Mother, he said softly. Please, have some breakfast. Lady Liu sat alone on her couch, staring at the tray of food her son had brought. She frowned and waved it away. She had no appetite. Her heart was heavy, and her mind was clearly elsewhere. Father is gone, but you mustn't let your grief destroy your health, Zhu Yunwen said softly. He urged her to eat just a little, but his mother didn't seem to hear him. She looked out the window toward my courtyard, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. That third brother of yours, what kind of spells is he casting? The emperor summons him every single day. They even eat together. Don't you see what's happening? Zhu Yunwen looked toward my room and clenched his fists. When our father was alive, Yunwen was the favorite grandson. The emperor used to give him gifts and check his homework constantly. But in the month since the crown prince died, it was as if the emperor had forgotten Yunwen existed. Instead, his affection for me had become almost obsessive. He wasn't just seeing me. He was personally mentoring me. Rumors were already flying through the court. Mother, it's my fault, Yunwen said, his voice full of dejection. Don't talk nonsense, Lady Liu snapped, grabbing his hand. You are a gentleman, Yunwen. You don't know how to play these games. But starting tomorrow, you will go to the emperor every morning and evening to pay your respects. You cannot let that boy take everything. Yunwen gave a bitter smile. He is the emperor, mother. I can't just see him whenever I want. He is your grandfather, she hissed. You are the eldest grandson. There is no reason for him to refuse you. I have worked so hard for so many years for your sake. You must pull yourself together. What belongs to your father's eldest son must belong to you. I've spent a lifetime guarding against everyone for this. You cannot give up now. But if grandfather's heart isn't with me, Yunwen started, then we make it stay with you. She gritted her teeth. You just focus on being a filial grandson. Leave the rest to me. I've learned a few things in this palace. I know how to please people, and I know how to ruin them. As she spoke, her cold gaze shifted. She saw a massive procession entering the East Palace. It was the emperor's personal eunuch, Huang Goer, leading a group of guards and servants carrying a royal sedan chair and ceremonial banners. Lady Liu rushed to the door, trying to look composed. Chief Eunuch Huang, what is the meaning of this? Huang Goer and the others knelt. Greetings, Crown Princess. I am here on His Majesty's orders. We are heading to Prince Wu's quarters. Prince Wu. The title hit Lady Liu and Yunwen like a physical blow. The servants were carrying a full set of prince's regalia. Outside the gates, the Jinui, the emperor's secret police, stood tall in their flying fish robes, clutching their spring-embroidered blades. The emperor has issued a decree, Huang Goer whispered. His Highness, Prince Wu, is appointed as the imperial envoy. He is to review the capital's garrison and see General Lan Yu off to war. Lady Liu's head spun. If Yunwen hadn't caught her, she would have collapsed. Reviewing the army was a task the emperor used to reserve only for my father. It was a clear sign. The emperor had made his choice. Inside the garden, I was practicing my forms when the crowd of servants arrived. They carried boxes filled with silk and jade. I stopped, confused. What is all this? My dear prince, Huang Goer chirped, have you forgotten? Today you go to the military camp. The emperor said you must look the part of an imperial envoy. You are the emperor's grandson. You must show the world your dignity. Before I could protest, the eunuchs swarmed me. They stripped away my simple clothes and began the elaborate process of dressing a prince of the Ming. They brought in a large glass mirror, one of my own inventions, so I could see the transformation. The robe was heavy, woven with shimmering gold thread that caught the light. They fastened a belt made of pure white jade around my waist, followed by intricate pendants and golden pouches. The ivory comb slid through my hair, and they placed a crown of woven gold wire upon my head. I looked in the mirror. The boy I used to be was gone. In his place stood a young man radiating the aura of a ruler. "Third brother, you look so brave," my two younger sisters cheered, clapping their hands. My personal servant, old Wong, was actually crying. "You've grown up, master. I could die happy seeing you like this." The Jinui guards entered and knelt at my feet. "The sedan chair is ready, Your Highness." I looked at the ornate yellow chair and then at the guards. I didn't want to be carried like a fragile doll. I wanted them to see me. "Bring me a horse," I commanded. "I'm riding." The hooves of my pure white stallion clicked sharply against the stone tiles of the palace. Behind me, the armored boots of the Jinui sounded like a drumbeat of war. As I rode out of the palace gates, a massive column of cavalry fell into formation ahead of me to clear the path. Commoners and laborers along the road immediately turned their backs, pressing themselves against the walls. In this world, the poor weren't even allowed to look at someone of my rank. Officials who were on their way to the palace stopped in their tracks, stunned by the sight of my procession, before dropping to their knees in the dirt. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes fixed forward, leaving the towering walls of the forbidden city behind. I looked out at the wide streets stretching before me, and a surge of pride swelled in my chest. I felt unstoppable. As my procession slowly filtered out of the palace gates, I didn't see my grandfather, the Hongwu Emperor, standing high on the city walls behind me. Zhu Yuanzhang watched me go, his hands tucked behind his back. A small, rare smile played on his lips. "That grandson of mine," he whispered to the wind. "He's just like me." He began to walk down from the wall, lost in thought. He had ruled this empire for over 20 years, finally steering it onto the right path. My father, the late crown prince, had been the perfect successor, mature, steady, and ready to lead. But my father was gone now, leaving the throne's future hanging in the balance. Yet, seeing me just now, full of spirit, riding with such command, a new thought took root in the emperor's mind. Perhaps a bold, fearless young man was exactly what the Ming Empire needed to sail through the coming storms and surpass the achievements of his ancestors. He turned back to the palace walls and called out to his personal guard, "Get Zhang Huan. I want the commander of the Jinui to witness this." I hadn't even reached the military encampment outside Yingtian City when the air began to vibrate. Suddenly, the world was filled with the thunderous roar of war drums. The sound hit me like a tidal wave, one crash after another, shaking the very earth beneath my horse's hooves. It was a frantic, driving rhythm, like a summer storm, but it didn't make me feel panicked. Instead, my blood began to boil with excitement. The bustling capital seemed to vanish, replaced by the atmosphere of a rugged frontier battlefield. I could practically hear the shouts of men charging into the fray and the cheers of a victory won. Even my gentle white stallion felt it. Its mane bristled, and it let out a piercing neigh that matched the beat of the drums. I gripped my reins tight. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire in my veins. I knew what was coming. I was about to face the finest warriors of the Ming, the men who had driven out the Mongols and were ready to die for our land. The drums stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the ground trembled. From the distance, a cloud of dust rose as a massive force of ironclad cavalry swept toward me like a soaring dragon. At the very front, a rider with a thick, dark beard pulled his reins. His horse reared up, hooves flailing in the air, but the man sat as steady as a mountain. I looked at these men, tigers on horseback, and I smiled. "General Lan Yu," the lead rider shouted, "along with Wang Bai, Chang Sheng, Mao Ning, and Yu Tong Yuan, greet the Prince of Wu." The thundering hooves came to a dead halt. With a synchronized metallic crash of armor, every single rider dismounted and knelt in the dirt before me. Every high-ranking general in the army had come out to meet me personally. I jumped off my horse and rushed forward to help Lan Yu to his feet. "General," I said with a light laugh, "I am but a junior. You didn't need to come all this way out of the camp to greet me. I'm quite embarrassed." Lan Yu let out a booming laugh. "You are the Prince of Wu. It is our duty and our honor to welcome you." Behind him stood a man in his 50s with 2 blades hanging from his waist. This was Wang Bai, the Marquis of Dingyuan, a legendary warrior who had followed Lan Yu across the northern deserts. Then there was my uncle, Chang Sheng, and several other faces I recognized from history books. One man caught my eye, a veteran with hair and a beard as white as snow. Seeing me look at him, the old general spoke up, his voice loud and clear. "General Yu Tongyuan, at your service, your highness." I was genuinely stunned. "You are the youngest son of the Duke of Hejian, the brother of the Duke of Gua, the veteran General Yu Tongyuan." The old man laughed heartily. I didn't think the Prince of Wu would know my name. I looked at him with total sincerity. How could any descendant of the Zhu family forget the heroes of the Ming? The Yu family defines the word hero. The Yu family was legendary. His father, Yu Tingyu, had joined my grandfather during the crossing of the Yangtze and died fighting for the empire. His eldest brother, Yu Tonghai, was even more famous. Before my grandfather took the throne, his greatest enemy wasn't the Mongols, but Chun Yuliang, who had 1,000,000 men. During the desperate naval battle at Poyang Lake, the enemy ships were like floating mountains. It was Yu Tonghai who charged into the line of fire, carving a path through the enemy and turning the tide at the cost of his own life. My grandfather had wept over his body, and this man before me, Yu Tongyuan, was just as loyal. In the history I knew, he would eventually die in battle years from now, refusing to surrender to a rebel army because he wanted to repay the kindness of my grandfather. When I called them heroes of the Ming, Yu Tongyuan froze. His eyes turned red, and he bowed deeply, his voice trembling. To hear such praise from the prince, my father and brother can rest in peace. "General, please, stand up," I said, helping him up myself. "The prince is truly humble and respects his elders," Lan Yu praised. The other soldiers began to grin and laugh. "The prince treats us well," someone shouted from the ranks. "Of course he does," another yelled. "He's the crown prince's son. He's just like his father. He understands us rough men." My uncle, Chang Sheng, laughed. "Your Highness, please enter the camp and review the troops." I nodded and swung back onto my horse. "Show me the brave men of our Ming Empire." "Kill! Kill! Kill!" The roar of tens of thousands of voices shook the sky. My horse danced nervously under the sheer volume of the sound, and my blood, which had just cooled, started to simmer again. As far as I could see, there were battle flags snapping in the wind and endless squares of armored infantry. They stood like mountains, unshakable and solid. The early summer sun was bright, but it paled in comparison to the glint of their polished steel. The light reflecting off their spears and helmets wasn't just a reflection. It was a sharp, dangerous edge. These men were the sharpest blade of the Ming. They were a weapon unsheathed. "Long live the Prince of Wu. 10,000 years." The chant echoed across the drill grounds. As I reached the command platform, a guard tried to help me down, but I waved him off. I leaped from the saddle, adjusted my jade belt, and walked up the steps with a steady gaze. Next time, I thought, I'm wearing armor. I reached the top. Lan Yu stood beside me, drew his long blade, and roared at the top of his lungs, "Boys, let the review begin. Kill! Kill!" The shout of 10,000 tiger braves eclipsed the sun. The ground groaned under the weight of their voices. Then, the drum started again, fast, urgent, and rhythmic. To the beat of that ancient thunder, the massive squares of soldiers began to move. I watched from the platform as the flags shifted and the entire army transformed, a sea of steel moving as one single, deadly organism. The first row of soldiers moved forward like a black mountain, slow and unstoppable. These were the heavy infantry. Each man wore meticulously crafted plate armor that caught the early summer sun, the light dancing off the forged ripples in the steel. I've always believed you can judge an army's lethality just by looking at their spirit and their posture. As they marched past in perfect rows of 10, their eyes were fixed and steady, their frames massive. A thick, suffocating killing intent radiated from the ranks. These were veterans of 100 battles. I felt a flicker of surprise. I didn't expect such precise formations in this era, but I quickly shook the thought away, realizing I was being narrow-minded. While they didn't have the flashy parade drills of the modern world, this was an age where infantry lived or died by the strength of their formation. They were the Great Ming. Since the beginning, they had faced the Mongol Yuan cavalry, the men who conquered the world from the back of a horse. If our infantry couldn't hold a line, they wouldn't last a minute. I almost laughed to myself, thinking back to those web novels I read in my past life. Some authors claimed ancient people couldn't tell left from right. What a joke. If they couldn't tell left from right, how could they tell north from south? In the modern world, I knew plenty of people who couldn't find their way out of a parking lot. But here, the formation was a wall of iron, their footsteps a rhythmic thunder. The front rank carried long spears. Behind them were the heavy hitters, soldiers wielding iron axes, shears, and massive maces. Back in my time, people claimed China lost its forging techniques and couldn't make sharp katanas like the Japanese. That's not the whole truth. Chinese warfare was massive. We moved hundreds of thousands of men at a time. A delicate katana wasn't practical for mass equipment. More importantly, when everyone on the battlefield is wrapped in heavy iron, a katana is just a toy. To break heavy armor, you need weight. You need an axe or a hammer. One strike from a heavy iron shear would crumple any fancy blade instantly. In a real meat grinder, the Ming style won every time. As the heavy infantry marched, they let out a synchronized roar. The glint of their weapons seemed to change the color of the sky itself. "Your Highness," Lan Yu said, leaning in close. "This is the Tiger Brave Army. Back when we took the Yuan capital, my brother-in-law, your grandfather, the Crown Prince's father-in-law, personally led these men to break the walls. They cut down the Prince of Huai and the Grand Preceptor himself." Lan Yu dropped his voice to a whisper. "The commander, Yuan Yi, and the deputy, Yuan Xing, are both the emperor's adopted sons. They grew up studying alongside your late father." I looked at the two generals leading the Tiger Braves from horseback and nodded solemnly. Before I could say a word, a sound like rolling thunder erupted from the distance. The ground beneath the command platform shook. I squinted as the Ming cavalry surged forward. A rider out front held a massive banner high, the words "Dragon Soar" written in bold, aggressive strokes. Behind him came the heavy cavalry, both men and horses encased in iron plate. They looked like moving fortresses. Following them were the light cavalry in chainmail, carrying curved sabers and composite bows. A wave of pure, arrogant confidence washed over me as they passed. Their posture said it all. Give the order, and whoever the enemy is, they will be ground into dust. I noticed something strange, though. Many of the riders in the Dragon Soar unit wore their hair in nomadic braids. Lan Yu saw my confusion and grinned. "The Ming is invincible. Many tribes beyond the Great Wall have surrendered to us. Don't let their appearance fool you. Some of those guys were probably little princes in their own tribes before they joined us." I felt a surge of pride. This was the Great Ming, a civilization that could absorb anyone. But my smile froze as the next unit came into view. I stepped forward, gripping the railing, my eyes wide. Cannons. So many cannons. This was the Divine Engine camp. The front ranks were soldiers carrying various fire lances and hand cannons. Having been a soldier in my past life, I knew the history. China had mastered gunpowder during the Song dynasty, and the Mongols had stolen that black technology to conquer the West. But I never imagined the variety of firearms in this era would be so vast. There were three-eyed spears in the front, followed by wide-mouthed Zhonko cannons. They weren't like modern rifles, but the principle was the same. The wide-mouthed ones looked like iron bowls. They fired iron grit and scrap metal. In a battle, they were essentially giant shotguns that could clear an entire field in one blast. Behind the hand cannons came heavy artillery pieces pulled by horses. The wheels groaned under the weight, the black barrels polished until they shone, engraved with official markings. My palms itched just looking at them. "So, the Ming's firearms are already this advanced," I muttered to myself. The sheer power of this era shocked me. In the future, people would remember the Ming as a decaying, stagnant dynasty. But this Ming, the early Ming, was the most powerful nation on Earth. This wasn't the era of lazy emperors and corrupt eunuchs yet. This was the era of generals who conquered the horizon. Lan Yu laughed again when he heard me. You think this is a lot of cannons? When I fought the final battle against the northern Yuan in the desert, I lured their cavalry into a trap. I stayed on the high ground and circled my camels into a defensive ring. I mounted cannons on their backs. His eyes sparked with the memory of the slaughter. The enemy died in heaps. Their bodies literally blocked the path of their own charge. By the time they realized they couldn't break through, our main army had already surrounded them. I took 1,500 elite riders and smashed right through their center. I listened, captivated, wishing he could tell stories for 3 days straight. But the review was coming to an end. The units followed their flags back to their original positions, standing like iron nails driven into the earth. The wind whipped the banners, making them snap loudly in the silence. I walked to the edge of the platform where a large iron megaphone stood. I drew a deep breath, letting my voice ring out from my chest. By the Emperor's decree, I have come to see the warriors who will fight for our great Ming. I shouted, my voice booming across the field. And now, I have seen you. I see the brave souls of the Ming. I see the blood of our heroes. I see the elite who have survived 100 battles. I see the men who will bleed and sacrifice everything for our land. Across the drill grounds, tens of thousands of eyes lit up like a wildfire. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were the loyal blades of the Ming, ready to die for the empire. These men were the sons of the great Ming. They were the sharpest blades in the emperor's hand. But no one had ever told them they were heroes. From the highest generals to the lowest foot soldiers, the moment my words landed, their blood began to boil. You are heroes, I shouted, my voice cracking the silence. You are the shield guarding our borders. You are the pillar that millions of Ming citizens lean on. You keep the enemy far from our soil. You protect the very sun and moon of this empire. My throat felt like it was on fire, but I didn't stop. I poured every ounce of emotion I had into my lungs. I will tell His Majesty that today, I saw the bravest men in the world. I see the hunger for victory in your eyes. I see the spirit that will not rest until the enemy is crushed. I see your courage to face death and your absolute loyalty to the Ming. I let out one last roar. I will tell the emperor that as long as you are here, the great Ming will stand forever. Ming, Ming, Ming. The response was like a tidal wave. Tens of thousands of voices crashed against the sky, a storm of sound that shook the very earth. When the echoes finally died down, I pulled in a deep breath and shouted again. My only regret is that I cannot fight beside you. I scanned the sea of young, weathered faces. Brothers, go and slay the enemy. On the day you return in triumph, I, Zhu Yunting, will personally pour your wine and welcome you home. The soldiers went wild. Their blood was white-hot now. I was the emperor's direct grandson, the Prince of Wu, and I had just called them brothers. I had promised to serve them wine with my own hands. Some of the older veterans actually had tears in their eyes. Suddenly, a single voice started a new chant, and the rest followed instantly. Long live the Prince of Wu. 10,000 years to the Prince of Wu. The sound stunned me for a moment. I looked out at them and smiled. As the shouting faded, I said something that left everyone speechless. To the soldiers guarding our borders, may you live 1,000 years. To the soldiers expanding our territory, may you live 1,000 years. To the warriors of the Ming, 1,000 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. The drill grounds went deathly silent for a heartbeat. Then, a roar erupted that eclipsed everything before it. Long live the emperor. Long live the great Ming. I looked at their flushed faces and hoarse throats. I turned to Lan Yu and smiled. One day, I will fight alongside them. Lan Yu bowed deeply, his expression dead serious. When that day comes, I will personally lead your horse, your highness. I laughed loudly. It's a deal. I turned and walked off the platform with long strides. Lan Yu watched my back, looking a bit dazed. Even though he was my biggest supporter, he had always seen me as a child. Today he saw a man, passionate, mature, and full of fire. In me, he saw the shadows of two people, my late father, the beloved crown prince, and my uncle, the fierce and decisive Prince of Yen. Meanwhile, back in the East Palace of the Forbidden City, Lady Liu was dressed in simple, plain clothes. She wore no makeup as she stood before the mirror, fixing her collar. A maid appeared behind her. "My lady, the noodle soup is ready. I added extra sesame oil and a soft-boiled egg, just as you asked." Lady Liu glanced at her reflection one last time. "Good. Pack it up. Don't let it get cold." She carried the stone food box herself. She knew the emperor's habits perfectly. He hated flashy, arrogant women. He wanted his daughters-in-law to be dignified, simple, and frugal. Every woman in this palace lived in the shadow of a dead woman, Empress Ma. The late empress had been humble, kind, and had cooked her own meals even as queen. The emperor believed she was the peak of womanhood, and he expected the same from the wives of his sons. Lady Liu had secured her position by mimicking those virtues. She arrived at the palace of heavenly purity, where the head eunuch, Huang Guer, met her. "Greetings, my lady," he said. "Please inform His Majesty I wish to see him." She replied with a graceful smile. "One moment," Huang Guer whispered. "Master Jiang Huan is just finishing up inside. I'll go in once he leaves." Jiang Huan, the commander of the Jinyue, the emperor's secret police. Just hearing the name made Lady Liu's heart skip a beat. The Jinyue were the emperor's eyes, ears, and hands. Whenever they were around, blood usually followed. She felt a sudden wave of anxiety. "Eunuch, how is the emperor's mood?" she whispered. "Don't worry." Huang Guer smiled softly. "His Majesty is in a good mood today." As they spoke, a tall man with a cold, gloomy face stepped out of the hall. It was Jiang Huan. He gave a polite but hollow bow to Lady Liu and walked away without a word. Inside the hall, the emperor was stretching his aching back. Huang Guer hurried in and bowed. "Your Majesty, the crown princess is here. She brought the noodle soup she made herself. I can smell the sesame oil from here." Huang Guer expected a smile. Instead, the emperor's face remained cold. Usually, he welcomed her with open arms to talk about family. But today, he didn't even look up. Huang Guer knew the emperor's moods better than anyone. He saw the shift instantly. "I'm busy," the emperor said flatly. "I don't have time. Tell her to go back." Huang Guer bowed and walked back outside. Lady Liu was busy fussing over the food box, worried the soup was getting cold. When she saw the eunuch return, she straightened her clothes, expecting to be called in. "My lady, please return to your quarters," Huang Guer said, unable to look her in the eye. "The emperor says he is busy." Lady Liu froze. The woman the emperor had once praised for having the spirit of the late empress had somehow, unknowingly, lost his favor. I saw the look on Lady Liu's face when the news hit her. The emperor wouldn't even see her. She knew exactly what those words meant. "I'm busy" was just a polite way of saying he didn't want her there. He didn't want to see her. He didn't care to see her. He didn't value her presence anymore. When those words came from the emperor's mouth, they carried a heavy weight. There are no secrets in the palace. I knew that within an hour, the news would spread like wildfire through the halls and out into the city. Everyone would know. The emperor had a problem with his daughter-in-law. In this world, being disliked by the emperor was more than a social slight. It was dangerous. Lady Liu walked back to her quarters like a hollow shell. She was distracted, her soul seemingly left behind in the hall. The palace was a fortress, a city of its own. It was a place filled with the smartest and most observant people on earth. It was also a place for the most poisonous. She kept walking, her mind racing in circles. She went over every possible mistake. Where had she gone wrong? Why did the emperor suddenly treat her with such contempt? Why did he have this new, cold view of her? She thought about it until her head throbbed. Finally, she realized there was only one possibility. It all came down to one person.